Is it possible to quarrel with a loved one over car tire pressure? For one spouse in Perry, it certainly was. Their foolish argument ended tragically for one of them. Stanford Memorial Church was Arlis's sanctuary, a place to escape troubles and find peace. Entering 10 minutes before closing time, the young woman approached the altar and knelt in prayer. At that moment, she was alone in the majestic building. The last parishioners had crossed paths with her as she walked in. Suddenly, a door slammed somewhere behind her. Perhaps another university student had decided to say a nighttime prayer. However, this was no student at all. It was death itself stalking Arlis. Arlis Kaide Kima was born February 22, 1955 in the small town of Linton, North Dakota, the youngest of 3 children. Her parents Marvin and Jean were devout Christians, actively involved in the Presbyterian Church. Thus, from an early age, their children considered attending church an integral part of their lives. In 1963, when Arlis was 8, the family moved to Bismarck, North Dakota's capital, a quiet, isolated town on the Missouri River's eastern banks, surrounded by forests. The Dykmas ran their own car dealership and helped establish a Reformed church in town, later renamed Bismarck Community Church. Marvin served as an elder, while Jean acted as Sunday school director. Consequently, their children spent much time at church. Arlis was described as compassionate and trusting, with a certain naivety towards others. She always saw the good in people, not dwelling on their flaws. As Arlis grew older, her extracurricular activities remained closely tied to the church. She taught Sunday school and worked with a youth Christian organization spreading Jesus' teachings to strengthen teenagers' faith, like her parents did. Overall, Arlis lived a sheltered life, never leaving Bismarck and staying under the watchful eye of older family members. In high school, Arlis met a young man named Bruce Perry, and they immediately felt strong mutual attraction. The two quickly became a couple, trying to spend every free moment together. Bruce also came from a large family, second of John and Duncan Perry's 4 children. His mother was a homemaker, and his father a dentist. Bruce was born and raised in a quiet Midwestern town, enjoying a comfortable childhood. He was quite popular in his class, excelling in sports and setting numerous local track and field records. Additionally, Bruce was very intelligent and focused on his studies, planning to attend Stanford University's medical school after graduation to pursue further education in that field. In 1973, Bruce Perry finished high school and moved over 1,200 miles away, leaving Arlis in North Dakota. Stanford University was located in Palo Alto, California. The boy's athletic achievements helped him realize his dreams. His girlfriend also decided to continue her education, but chose to stay home, enrolling in Bismarck Community College. Simultaneously, Bruce's father Duncan offered the student a job as a secretary in his dental office. Arlis's life was quite busy. She balanced studies, work at the dentist's office, and in her free time continued promoting her church. She served as a missionary, organized various church events, and participated in Christian organizations such as Young Life and Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Despite the vast distance between Arlis and Bruce, their relationship endured. The young lovers exchanged lengthy, affectionate letters and occasionally connected via landline phone. The 1,000-plus mile gap couldn't extinguish their youthful romance. Instead, it strengthened their feelings for each other. Bruce's first year at Stanford proved a challenging test for both. Upon completing his studies, Bruce returned home for summer. He'd awaited this moment for what felt like an eternity, so he immediately proposed to Arlis. The young man couldn't fathom living apart from his girlfriend for several more years, so their engagement became their release from the burden of separation. The wedding took place on August 17, 1974, at Bismarck's Reformed Church. Surrounded by close relatives and friends, the young couple vowed to stand by each other in sickness and in health. They spent their brief honeymoon in a cabin owned by Bruce's parents. Come fall, when it was time to resume studies, the newlyweds journeyed together to Palo Alto, California. They settled in Quillen Hall in Escondido Village, a Stanford University residence designated exclusively for married couples. At the time, Bruce was a second-year medical student, spending his days in the library, attending lectures, or completing hospital rotations. The young man also worked part-time to support himself and his wife, Arlis. The newlywed wife spent most of her time on campus as a homemaker, using her free hours to explore the grounds, familiarize herself with the surroundings, and learn new things. Arlis quickly realized how different California was from North Dakota. The young woman was accustomed to her small town's conservative atmosphere, and now she found herself thrust into the technical progress of liberal California at the tail end of the hippie era. Arlis witnessed many things she'd never seen before. The only downside was her husband's complete immersion in studies and work to support their family. Although the couple was now together, they didn't spend much time with each other. Arlis often found herself alone, so she began visiting Stanford Memorial Church, which offered her sanctuary and peace whenever she needed it. Later, Arlis took a job as a secretary at a nearby law firm. Initially, the young woman frequently wrote to her family friends back in Bismarck about feeling sad and lonely. In one letter to her sister, she mentioned how difficult it was to make friends here. Arlis was often tempted to knock on a random door and ask if anyone needed a friend. However, once she visited Stanford Memorial Church and was instantly captivated, the tone of her messages changed dramatically. She'd never seen such a grand and beautiful place before. This discovery gave her something new and exciting to look forward to. In truth, Arlis simply needed time to adjust to her new location and role as a wife. She had never left Bismarck before, so her first weeks in Palo Alto were indeed challenging. The young lover's life was gradually improving. Arlis and Bruce had started to adapt to married life, settled into their small campus nest, and were making grand plans for the future. However, as often happens, one minor quarrel completely altered their fate. On the night of October 12, 1974, Stanford's campus was bustling with activity. This was due to ongoing sports competitions between Stanford University and the University of California, Los Angeles. Football games had been drawing much attention lately, so that evening students from different schools gathered in dorm rooms for numerous parties. Sounds of music and lively laughter could be heard here and there. The Perrys didn't plan to join the general merriment. Bruce wanted to spend the evening immersed in studying, while Arlis intended to walk to the mailbox. She had several letters addressed to her friends and family in Bismarck. For her, there was nothing unusual about going out in the evening. California weather allowed for enjoyable walks. But due to everything happening on campus, Bruce didn't want his wife wandering alone. So he briefly set aside his medical textbook and decided to accompany her. It was a chance to get some fresh night air and clear his head. This was an excellent opportunity to spend some time together, as they mainly saw each other only in the bedroom due to studies and work. Around 11:30 p.m., the couple left their residence and leisurely headed towards the mailbox. They chatted about trivial matters until the conversation turned to their car. A small argument arose between husband and wife regarding tire pressure. It was such a minor issue, not worth quarreling over at all. However, the young people had a serious falling out. They were just passing by Stanford Memorial Church when Arlis expressed her desire to be alone to cool off. She said she'd go to the church and spend some time by herself. The temple's silence always calmed her. Bruce agreed they'd both overreacted, so he headed back to their apartment, located just a mile from the church, and Arlis entered the building. The clock showed 11:50, with 10 minutes until closing. The young woman passed two parishioners preparing to leave the church. She descended to the front pews on the altar's left side and knelt to pray. The parishioners noticed Arlis looked slightly upset. As they exited, they encountered another young man also heading inside past them. He appeared to be about 20 to 25 years old. Blonde hair, athletic build, nothing remarkable. He wore a blue short-sleeved shirt. At 12:10 a.m., night guard Stephen Crawford entered the church, looked around, saw no one, and called out that he was about to lock the main gates, just in case. If any visitors were in the hall, they would have hurried to exit. Since no one responded, the man turned off the lights, locked the doors, then continued his campus rounds. Meanwhile, Bruce, having calmed down from their silly argument, waited about 20 minutes after the church closed. When Arlis still hadn't come home, he went to look for her. The young man reached the temple, pulled the doors, but they were already locked for the night. He then walked around campus and nearby areas, but didn't encounter Arlis. Bruce guessed they had likely missed each other. Now his young wife, not finding him at home, might think he was still angry. Feeling a surge of affection for his spouse and berating himself for the ridiculous situation, the young man hurried home. However, the apartment was empty, with no sign of his wife. Bruce thought they had missed each other again, so he stayed to wait for Arlis's return. A couple of hours later, night guard Stephen Crawford made a second round in the church, just to ensure no one had broken in, given the students' festive mood. He opened the temple's front door, did a full sweep, checked all nooks, tugged the side exit handle, and locked up again. Bruce, now restless, pondered where his wife could have gone. Perhaps she was so offended by their argument that she decided to spite him by dropping in on a party. Though he immediately dismissed this thought, knowing Arlis wasn't one to enjoy spending time with tipsy students. At 3 a.m, when the young woman still hadn't come home, Bruce became genuinely frightened. A baseless fear settled in the back of his mind, so he decided it was time to involve the police. The student informed the emergency dispatcher that his wife hadn't returned home. The young man was certain Arlis had fallen asleep in the church and was now locked inside. He was adamant that his wife was still inside, so 2 police officers went to the temple to check Bruce's assumption. They circled the building's perimeter, knocked on the door, listening for any response to the knocking. But absolute silence reigned inside the church, and the patrolman returned empty-handed. At 5:45 a.m., the guard, finishing his shift, returned to the temple to open it for worshippers. Entering the building, he noticed one of the side doors was ajar. Naturally, the watchman first rushed to check if the interior had been vandalized or if anything had been stolen. Everything seemed in order, but there had to be a reason why the side door was unlocked. Soon, he indeed discovered what he least expected to see at the end of his work shift. In the church's front section, on the floor, lay the body of 19-year-old Arlis Perry, right where she was last seen, kneeling in prayer. Crawford immediately contacted the police and his supervisor. Detectives arriving at the crime scene found Arlis lying on her back. She was unclothed below the waist, with her jeans covering the lower part of her body. Her blouse was torn. The girl's hands were crossed on her chest, holding one of the altar candles placed between her fingers. Another longer candle was inserted into her genitals, further desecrating the body. Arlis's neck was broken, and an ice pick with a broken handle protruded from her head behind her left ear. The handle itself was nowhere to be found. Near the deceased's body lay a kneeling cushion on which traces of seminal fluid were later discovered. One of the candles bore a smudged palm print. During the crime scene examination, detectives noticed the side door had been forced open from the inside. Apparently, whoever did this to Arlis was locked inside with her and later had to escape this way. A pair of officers were given the difficult and unpleasant task of locating Bruce Perry in Quillen Hall and delivering the terrible news. When a distressed Bruce opened the door to the police, he was covered in blood. According to him, when stressed, he often experienced severe nosebleeds. and now he was indeed anxious because his wife hadn't returned home. Instead of informing the young man about his wife's death, the officers decided to take him to the police station for questioning. The conversation with Bruce Perry lasted 2 hours. During this time, detectives presented him with several possible scenarios in which Arlis could have upset her husband so much that he committed what's called a crime of passion. Detectives suggested that his wife was cheating on Bruce or had become pregnant, and he didn't want a child, so he decided to take revenge. In most investigations, those closest to the victim usually fall under suspicion first. In this case, given that the couple had moved to California just a few weeks ago, Bruce was indeed the only person Arlis knew. Although Bruce denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance, he wasn't believed, and a blood sample from his shirt was taken as evidence to check if it matched his blood type or Arlis's. Additionally, the confused man was subjected to a polygraph test. The police wanted to ensure Bruce wasn't lying. At the time, the lie detector was considered an accurate device that couldn't be fooled. Comparative DNA analysis in 1974 was still at a fairly low level, so no particular hopes were placed on it. Bruce showed no resistance or unwillingness to cooperate, but he was very angry. Considering that the young man was still worried about his missing wife, it became clear that the detective's actions provoked fury. Instead of searching for his spouse, they were wasting a lot of time interrogating her husband. But until he passed a successful polygraph test, until it was determined that the blood on his shirt didn't match the deceased's blood type, until it was revealed that the palm print on one of the candles didn't match Bruce's palm print, he was considered the #1 suspect. Only when all checks were completed was the young man informed that Arlis had been found lifeless on the church floor. After Bruce was cleared of suspicion, investigators theorized it was a random attack for personal gain, committed by some unstable criminal. So they began checking all previously convicted individuals in the area. With over 100 people, they found no matches. The theory that Arlis was killed by a random malefactor who entered the church and saw a lone girl was rejected, deciding that the perpetrator must have known the church's layout and operating hours well. So the next focus of the detective's attention was the night guard Stephen Crawford, who discovered Arlis's remains. The forensic lab established the approximate time of the girl's death. She died around midnight. A legitimate question arose. If Crawford made rounds in the church at 12:10 a.m. and then at 2 a.m., how could he not have noticed a dead body lying in front of the altar? But the guard insisted he had fully performed his job, thoroughly checked all doors and every corner of the church. And at the time of his rounds, there was no one there. Stephen was a former police officer himself and knew all the intricacies of the job, so it was foolish not to believe him. His lie could only be that he had been negligent in his duties as a guard and hadn't actually checked the church thoroughly. Perhaps he had just glanced in, seen nothing, and moved on. Nevertheless, the man was also asked to undergo a polygraph test, which he passed successfully, and his palm print was compared with the one found on the candle. No matches were found, so all suspicions were soon dropped, and he was released. It was decided that between midnight and 3 a.m., the perpetrator had hidden somewhere inside the church and concealed the victim's body, then placed the girl by the altar, broke open the side door from the inside, and fled. The next morning at 11 a.m., Sunday Mass was held at Stanford Memorial Church. However, the gathering, full of journalists and grieving students, was moved to the lawn in front of the building to preserve the crime scene. The dean of Stanford Chapel suggested that, judging by the symbolic positioning of Arlis's body, this resembled a satanic ritual. The only person with access to the church after hours, besides the guard, was the dean himself, so he too was listed as a suspect, forced to undergo a polygraph test and have his fingerprints taken, again revealing no matches. The memorial service for Arlis was held on October 15, 1974, in the same church where she was found. The entire ceremony was ambiguous. On one hand, Bruce and his family, the Dykema family, sat just a few meters from where the lifeless body was discovered. On the other hand, this church had become one of Arlis's favorite places, so it was a kind of tribute to her memory. Many Stanford University students and faculty attended the service simply to express support for the family. Although among those present, only Bruce, relatives, and a couple of colleagues from the law firm where she had worked for just 2 weeks personally knew the girl. Arlis hadn't had time to meet anyone during her time in Palo Alto. When one of Arlis's colleagues first saw Bruce at the memorial service, he was very surprised. That Friday, October 11th, the day before Arlis's death, a young man had visited her at work. They talked for about 15 minutes, after which Arlis returned to her desk, extremely upset. The colleague assumed it was her husband Bruce, but now, seeing Arlis's real spouse, the law firm employee couldn't get that conversation between the girl and the stranger out of his head on the eve of her death. Realizing that this person wasn't actually her husband, the colleague decided to inform the police about this strange conversation. He had no idea who the man was, could only give a brief description. Blonde, appeared to be about 20 years old, athletic build. This description matched what the two parishioners had given, who had seen Arlis that night in the church when they encountered a young man of similar appearance on their way out. Despite this second mention of a young man fitting the same description, the detectives didn't even attempt to identify or locate him. The description was too broad, potentially matching nearly every other student. Moreover, they had witnesses who had passed by the church between 12:15 and 12:30 a.m. These people heard strange noises coming from inside, but when they stopped to listen, the noise abruptly ceased. The passers-by continued on, deciding they must have imagined it. Meanwhile, Arlis's remains were brought home to Bismarck. The funeral service was held in the same Reformed church where just a couple of months earlier, the girl had married Bruce. Bruce also returned home to attend his wife's funeral and be surrounded by people who loved and supported him. The horrifying details of what happened to Arlis were not made public. At this point, family members were only told that an unknown person had taken her life and that 2 items belonging to the girl were missing from the crime scene. But which items specifically, no one disclosed. The perpetrator had presumably taken them as trophies. Relatives knew nothing about the candle, nothing about the ice pick, nothing about the kneeling cushion with traces of seminal fluid. They were spared these terrible details, at least for the time being. Less than 2 weeks after Arlis's funeral, another strange event occurred in her hometown. The temporary grave marker was stolen from the deceased girl's grave. Other grave monuments remained untouched. The distance between North Dakota and California is considerable, and imagining that the criminal had somehow reached Arlis even here was unsettling and even terrifying. For many people, this became a telling indication that the killer who took Arlis's life resided in Bismarck or its vicinity. Investigators and the public were horrified by the brutal slaying of a defenseless young woman. What could have been going through the perpetrator's mind to commit such a repulsive act, especially in a place where people come seeking protection and assistance? Detectives continued to examine potential suspects, but with each passing month, their confidence in finding the criminal who had desecrated such a sacred place waned. 1 year passed, then 2, then 3, and the authorities still made no headway in the investigation. The public criticized the detectives for inaction. Lacking other leads, the police turned to the FBI for help, requesting a specialist to create a profile of the individual who had deprived Arlis of her life. The profiler stated that the person was likely a loner, without family, who kept meticulous records about the church and its parishioners. He might have had a military background, with an approximate age between 17 and 22. After the crime, he may have kept items belonging to the victim as trophies. Then, in 1979, 5 years after Arlis's death, David Berkowitz, widely known as the serial offender son of Sam, decided to interject himself into the investigation. He penned a letter suggesting he knew who had sent Arlis to the great beyond. Investigators traveled across the country to New York State to interrogate David, who was incarcerated at the time. This individual had been sentenced to 6 life terms for involvement in 8 shootings that resulted in several innocent casualties. David was known for seeking attention. He initially told the FBI that a demon disguised as his neighbor's dog had ordered him to end people's lives. Eventually, he abandoned this absurd story and admitted to fabricating it all. Now, serving his sentence, he sent letters to police departments nationwide about various crimes, relishing the attention it garnered. It was evident that David was bored in prison, and upon hearing about the church incident, he decided to contribute his own hypotheses. David chose to elaborate on the satanic cult angle, claiming Arlis Perry had been under surveillance for a long time. Cult members from North Dakota allegedly traveled to Stanford specifically to eliminate the young woman who was spreading God's word. The first investigator who arrived in New York to question David realized within half an hour that all his statements were false, mere fantasies concocted in his troubled mind, and that they had simply wasted time, although some later believed David's tales. The Satanist narrative continued in 1987, 13 years after the church crime. A former New York Post columnist, Maury Terry, authored a book titled The Ultimate Evil, presenting his theory about what happened to Arlis Perry that night. He essentially continued David's story, stating that a year before moving to California, the young woman had made several attempts to convert cult members to Christianity, and they decided to seek revenge. The author also insisted that the man who visited Arlis at the law firm a day before her demise, with whom she had an unpleasant conversation, was one of the cult members. These discussions began emerging after Arlis's parents revealed that their daughter indeed traveled around the area as a missionary, trying to convert non-believers and essentially save their souls. This was part of her work. Near Bismarck, there existed a cult called the Church of the Final Judgment, where rituals were conducted. Before departing for Palo Alto, Arlis went there to attempt to convert people to the true faith. However, investigators didn't believe this had any connection to what happened to Arlis. They found it much more likely that the perpetrator had staged the crime scene to divert attention from himself. The church wasn't symbolic to him, but it certainly helped advance the Satanism theory and thereby generate numerous rumors in the media and announcements. Rather, detectives linked the crime to 2 similar incidents where 2 other young women met their demise at Stanford University. 21-year-old Leslie Marie Perloff, a recent Stanford graduate, vanished in February 1973 after leaving the law library where she worked as a clerk. Her peer Janet Ann Taylor was visiting friends on Stanford University campus and attempted to hitchhike home. She disappeared in March 1974, and her body was only found a year later, but circumstantial evidence indicated these cases were unrelated. Although Arlis Perry's case was eventually closed, investigators never ceased their search for the perpetrator. The lead detective always kept a photo of the young woman with him as a reminder that justice needed to be served sooner or later. The cold case unit in the district attorney's office regularly reviewed the case over many years. Law enforcement knew that the Perry and Dykema families never stopped believing that the villain who took Arlis's life would face deserved punishment. And in 2018, 44 years after her passing, the long-awaited breakthrough finally occurred. The sheriff's office continued submitting evidence to the forensics lab, hoping for a breakthrough in the case, and it finally arrived. DNA comparison technology had advanced significantly. A semen sample found on Arlis's pillow and jeans was sent for testing once again, and a miracle occurred. The DNA sample matched one of the previous suspects in the case. It was none other than the night watchman, Stephen Crawford. By then, the man was 72 years old. He was a U.S. Air Force veteran who later served as a police officer. In 1971, he began working for Stanford University's Department of Public Safety, though not by choice. A new police chief decided to reduce staff by 75%. Stephen was among those offered a security guard position in exchange for his badge, which he strongly disliked. He perceived the offer as an insult. For many years, he constantly complained about being treated unfairly. The former serviceman despised his new role. He eventually quit 2 years after Arlis's death. In fact, Stephen was caught committing fraud. He had forged a diploma using a blank university form. During this investigation, it was also discovered that this wasn't the only crime he had committed during his years on campus. The guard had stolen and sold several historically valuable items, including about 200 rare books, numerous Native American artifacts, and even the university founder's walking stick. For this case, Stephen received a 6-month suspended sentence and 2 years of probation. The former military man moved to San Jose, California, and lived a relatively peaceful, quiet life until the DNA match surfaced in the database. On June 20, 2018, investigators arrived at his apartment. Knocking on the door, they announced their presence. Crawford asked through the door for a couple of minutes to get dressed. When the police burst into the home, Stephen was sitting on his bed, armed with a pistol. The officers immediately retreated, fearing he might open fire. A second later, a shot rang out. Stephen Crawford was found lying on the bed with a bullet wound to his head. His death was pronounced at the scene. A search of the apartment uncovered a copy of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, which discussed Arlis Perry's unsolved crime, as well as a handwritten recusal note Stephen had written 2 years earlier, in 2016, when investigators were questioning people and collecting DNA samples. It was evident that Stephen had feared all his life that he would eventually be found and linked to the crime at Stanford Memorial Church. When the police knocked on his door, he likely decided his time had come. The guard wanted to throw investigators off track by staging the crime scene in a way that suggested a ritual killing. However, we'll never know for certain why he did what he did, as Stephen died before investigators could question him again. Unfortunately, Arlis's father, Marvin Dykema, passed away just 3 months prior, never learning who was responsible for his daughter's death. The young woman's mother, Jean Dykema, was 88 years old at the time and shared what 44 years of waiting for justice had cost the family. The only thing that comforted the woman all this time was knowing there's someone more powerful than the police who could punish the offender. And people needn't worry about it, as Arlis couldn't be brought back. Bruce Perry earned his medical degree from Northwestern University and subsequently became a world-renowned expert in child mental health. He specialized in working with children who had experienced severe traumas, such as the Columbine High School massacre, the Waco siege, and the Oklahoma City bombing. Bruce has appeared on television numerous times, sharing his research and methods. He's also an author of 3 books, one of which he wrote as a student with Oprah Winfrey. Bruce remarried and understandably doesn't wish to speak publicly about Arlis and what happened to her. Regrettably, Stephen Crawford managed to evade justice for 44 long years and live to an advanced age, unlike Arlis Perry, whose life he cut short at 19. One can only hope that he'll answer for her death before a higher power. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. Linwood, New Jersey. One morning in 2012, a handyman who assisted April Kauffman in caring for her collection of exotic birds arrived at her residence at the end of a cul-de-sac and discovered his employer face down on the bedroom floor. She had been shot twice. The entrance to the house was left unlocked. April Kauffman was a force to be reckoned with. She was a fighter. That's how people who came to pay their respects described her. The entire Linwood community was stunned by what had happened to this woman. No one could comprehend why anyone would want to take her life. Kimberly sat in the front row next to the individual who had sent her mother to the afterlife. She was absolutely certain about this, but didn't know how to prove it. April Christine Faza was born on October 27, 1964, in Atlantic City, New Jersey. The little girl's childhood could hardly be called happy. Her father was virtually absent from her life. When she turned 11, her mother placed April's 4 siblings in foster care. As a result, April was left with lifelong guilt and the heavy burden of being the only child her mother chose to raise herself. Having a daughter didn't hinder the woman from pursuing her personal life, as April spent most of her childhood under her grandmother's care. The grandmother handled her upbringing while April's inadequate mother engaged in toxic and complicated relationships with numerous partners. However, April's challenging childhood became the foundation for her future success. It all began when she gave birth to her only daughter, Kimberly, at 17. This wasn't an accidental pregnancy. April had always yearned for the maternal love and support she lacked as a child. Therefore, everything was different with her daughter. She viewed this child as a gift from heaven and strived to become the best mother in the world for Kim. Despite her young age, she excelled at this. From 17 onwards, April's life began to change. After her daughter's birth, she left high school, later obtaining her GED, and immediately started working to support her child. Her career began with training as a hairstylist. Then April managed to open her own beauty salon. Along with this, she ventured into the restaurant business and began managing a small cafe. This woman had one defining trait: perseverance. If April set a goal for herself, nothing and no one could stop her. Moreover, she was determined, hardworking, and always believed in herself. Many people described her as a combination of a princess and a bulldog. This was the most accurate characterization of April, delicate on the outside, but with an iron grip. Besides her outstanding personality and remarkable character traits, April was also a very attractive woman, but people remembered her as the voice of a weekly radio show in Atlantic City, hosted by April Kauffman. She became something of a local celebrity. Listeners appreciated the host's enthusiasm when she voiced her feelings and convictions, and found encouraging words for any audience. It was her own show, where she could speak without hesitation about everything she believed in, whether it was social welfare or rampant crime. But April's most important and necessary passion was helping veterans. She believed that those who gave their strength and health to their country deserved to be treated as heroes. One of her life missions was to change the situation for the better. April regularly supported charities that dealt with veterans' rights. She was invited to speak at events dedicated to this topic. This woman also managed to get close to many officials and government leaders in her district, and she had plans to influence many positive changes regarding the lives of former military personnel. April was a person who was truly respected and loved. When she spoke, the entire audience was captivated by her words, because these were not just beautiful phrases, they concealed her true position on many issues. At the same time, April was a down-to-earth person, after talking to whom interlocutors immediately felt inspired. Barely acquainted people left as good friends with her after a brief dialogue. Every Thanksgiving, April hosted a dinner at her home for recruits from the U.S. Coast Guard station in Cape May. Young men and women who couldn't spend this holiday with their family and friends due to duty received a warm welcome in April's home. They were treated like family members, so this woman was a local legend in her town. Thanks to her advocacy and charitable activities, April was able to find personal happiness. She met Dr. James Kauffman, who embodied all the traits of an ideal man. James was a wealthy and respected endocrinologist. For many years, he frequently attended veterans' rights programs and talked about completing 2 military tours in Vietnam. Dr. Kauffman also often appeared on April's radio show, speaking on behalf of veterans. James, like his chosen one, had already been married before, but his relationship with his partner had fallen apart. In all other respects, he fully matched April's interests and desires. According to his stories, he was a veteran, a soldier in the Army Special Forces, and he had the same passion for fast cars and motorcycles as April, who adored her red Corvette and her motorcycle. To some extent, this woman suffered from an adrenaline addiction. Both James and April were the type of people who work hard and know how to relax and enjoy life well. The tastes and interests of the two lovers coincided so much that in 2003, on Valentine's Day, they got married and very quickly became the most famous and influential couple in Linwood, New Jersey. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Initially, everything seemed to be going well for them, but soon, strange things began happening with James. It all started with April's daughter, Kim, who needed to interview a veteran for a school project. She decided James would be perfect for this and asked him to share a war story. James agreed, but oddly, he said her mom shouldn't know about it. James recounted surviving a brutal attack in Vietnam, where his entire platoon perished except for him. He escaped to safety, quenching his thirst by licking water off leaves. He gathered all the fallen soldiers' dog tags to return to their families. Of course, this seemed impressive to a schoolgirl. In Kimberly's eyes, he appeared a hero, if it had all been true. The key word being if. Overall, April's life with Dr. Kauffman was comfortable in many ways. They lived in a huge 7,000-square-foot house, equipped with a bird room, housing rare parrots and other exotic birds. The basement had a small salon where April sometimes styled her friend's hair. They traveled and owned another house in Arizona. From the outside, April and James's married life seemed ideal, even if it was far from perfect. Soon, close friends and family, especially Kimberly, began noticing cracks in their relationship. Mother and daughter were incredibly close. April had Kim at 17, so she was not just a mom, but more of a friend and sister to her daughter. They always shared a special bond, so Kim could see things others didn't. Lately, the girl increasingly noticed alarming signals in James's behavior. For instance, this man was very domineering and sought to keep everything under his control. He monitored April's finances, despite her earning her own money. He would approach and turn off the light in the room where she was working, supposedly to save money. James often envied his wife when people were charmed by her. He disliked that all the attention at events went to April, while he was constantly forgotten. There were other, more serious issues. Once, during a heated argument with his wife, James pulled out a gun and fired at the wall. Bullet holes remained in the living room, later noticed by a neighbor. James Kauffman never parted with his weapon, carrying it everywhere. His ego was astronomical, as he considered himself a tough guy. One of the most important things in James's life, besides his weapon, was money. He wanted to be perceived as a wealthy, influential person, a leader. The fact that many considered his wife the head of the family provoked incredible anger in him. What irritated James most was being called Mr. April. Not every man can live with a strong and influential woman who has achieved success on her own. James was unfortunate in this regard, as he always remained in his wife's shadow. He would flee from parties and events if guests approached April while ignoring him. At home, he voiced his grievances to his wife. But what could she do if people respected and loved her for her straightforwardness and perseverance? Next to April, James's strong and powerful persona, which he considered himself to be and presented to others, revealed his weaker side. James was a coward, but this wasn't his worst trait. He was also a pathological liar. As it turned out, veteran James Kauffman had never actually served in the military. He had completely fabricated his military past, inventing stories of combat feats for over a decade. One day, April found out about this. It's hard to imagine how unpleasant it was for her to learn that her loved one had deceived her so treacherously. However, this was only half the problem. Worse was that the woman had repeatedly invited James to her radio show, where he shared his valiant stories. His lie was professionally devastating for April. The woman had great concerns that this would ruin her reputation. She had devoted so much time and effort to defending veterans' rights and failed to see that her personal veteran was a fake. When people learned the truth about James, they would perceive her in a bad light too, and this was detrimental to everything April had worked towards for most of her life. Eventually, she made the only right decision. She asked for a divorce. Dr. Kauffman desperately feared exposure, but most of all, he didn't want to give his wife half of his money in the divorce. James's net worth was estimated at about $4.5 million, and apparently, he couldn't allow April to get any of this money. He told his wife that he would rather send her to the afterlife than part with the money. The woman shared this with her daughter when they went out to lunch together. She said that James wasn't going to give her a divorce, threatening to take her life. And although she told Kim that he would never do it because he lacked the courage to go through with it, unfortunately, she was mistaken. In fact, April wasn't planning to sit idly by and do nothing either. She threatened to expose James's schemes with controlled substances. In reality, of course, she didn't want to do this. She just needed a way to somehow exit this relationship. And so, if he wouldn't give her a divorce, she would go to the police. That's exactly what April told Dr. Kauffman. In response to this statement, James devised a plan to eliminate his own wife. The Pagans motorcycle gang, whose name translates to pagans, was a group of big, tough guys wearing identical denim vests with embroidered badges and riding motorcycles. Initially, they called themselves the Brotherhood of 13 Bikers, but in the 1960s, the Pagans drafted their constitution and formed a management structure, electing a national president who was paid no less than the country's president. The Pagans engaged in illegal activities and were linked to organized crime in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and New York. In New Jersey, the club was led by President Andrew Glick, who would ultimately become a central figure in this case. What connected Dr. Kauffman to the motorcycle gang? With access to prescription drugs in his practice, James, as a doctor, prescribed pills to people who didn't need them. They, in turn, sold them for big money on city streets and illegal markets. Such practices only exacerbated the opioid epidemic in America. According to the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, the number of opioid prescriptions in the United States increased fourfold between 2000 and 2010. Deaths from prescription drugs rose by several hundred times. Members of the Pagans Motorcycle Club were Dr. Kauffman's clients. They actively participated with him in the distribution of controlled substances, earning big money in the process. Especially involved in this business were pagan representatives Ferdinand or Freddie Augello and Andrew Glick, the local club president. Freddie was a kind of mentor to Andrew. He taught him the pagans' most important rule: never to snitch on a brother, regardless of the severity of the crime. The pagans' affairs ran quite smoothly until a threat emerged in the form of April Kauffman, who promised to expose their activities to the police if her husband didn't grant her a divorce. That's when James devised a plan for her elimination, and he did it with Freddie's help. Dr. Kauffman offered Freddie Augello $50,000 to dispose of his wife. He made it clear that he wanted her dead because of the threat of exposing all operations and because he didn't want to share his money. Freddie himself didn't want to get his hands dirty, so he decided to assign the job to another pagan at a lower price. His brilliant plan was to pull off this job for $5,000 to $10,000 and keep the rest for himself. Pagan President Andrew Glick was aware of the planned operation but didn't intervene or try to stop it. For several months, Freddie couldn't find an executor. None of the pagans agreed to take responsibility for a crime where they would receive mere pennies compared to what Freddie would get. However, after some time, a volunteer named Frank Mulholland agreed to carry out the order. Officially, this person wasn't a pagan and had a strong opioid addiction. In the opinion of the motorcycle club president Andrew Glick, this was a terrible idea, because if Frank was caught, he would easily give them all up since he wasn't an official member of the pagans. But Freddie cared little about what would happen later. He wanted to quickly get Dr. Kauffman's money that he had promised for the job and hired Frank anyway. On Thursday, May 10, 2012, 47-year-old April Kauffman was still asleep in her bed when James was getting ready for work. He left before sunrise, stopping by a local store on his way to the office. April was a fan of the unusual. She had a whole collection of exotic birds at home. A man named Billy Gonzalez took care of them. He periodically visited the Kauffman's house to care for the birds. That morning of May 10th, James called him twice and asked him to stop by the house to check on April. Billy was surprised, as the doctor had never made such requests before. Nevertheless, the man decided to stop by and find out the reason for his boss's husband's concern. April was lying face down on the bedroom floor, shot twice. The first bullet grazed her elbow, and the second passed through her chest, piercing her lungs and heart, ultimately ending Mrs. Kauffman's life. Upon encountering the horrific scene in the house, Billy immediately called 911. According to James, he called Billy to check on April because she wasn't answering his calls. Every morning at 8:30, he called his wife to check if she had overslept and to wish her good morning. Billy Gonzalez, after calling the police and ambulance, phoned Doctor and informed him of the state in which he found his wife. James immediately made a duplicate call to 911 to deflect suspicion from himself. A detective who arrived at the scene was among the first to ask James a few questions. During the conversation, the doctor gave different versions of his story. At one point, he claimed he first ran upstairs and checked April's pulse, while at another time, he insisted he ran upstairs but didn't actually touch his wife. To clarify, neither of these stories was true because Billy, the worker who was there, said that James returned to the house and didn't even go upstairs to the bedroom to check on his wife's condition. A neighbor also confirmed seeing James standing outside, waiting for the police to arrive and not rushing inside. He ran into the house when he saw the police car turn onto their street, then rushed back out onto the porch, feigning the hysteria of a grief-stricken husband. James actually put on an excellent performance for the police, rolling on the lawn and sobbing, tearing out his hair. But who could have taken April Kauffman's life? She was very loved in the community, admired and trusted. Two people at the scene definitely knew the answer to this question. One of them was James, and the second was daughter Kimberly. From the very moment she received his call informing her that her mother was dead, the girl knew exactly who was responsible for her sudden demise, and she, without hesitation, reported this to the investigators. During a press conference held on May 11, 2012, officials announced they had enough information to conduct an in-depth investigation, which they believed would ultimately be successful. James Kauffman was almost immediately ruled out as a suspect, as he was captured on surveillance footage entering a local store at the time of the attack. Detectives determined he couldn't have shot April. Judging by the timing of the attack, there was also no evidence that James Kauffman pulled the trigger but organized the attack on his own wife. To pay final respects, more than 500 people attended April's funeral at Beth El Synagogue in Margate. The community of Linwood and surrounding areas was shocked by the bloody massacre. Many wanted to speak and honor the deceased. Strangers spoke lovingly about the woman who had dedicated herself to serving the community. April's co-host on several radio shows told the press that April did the work of 100 people. She was irreplaceable. Her energy was incredible. At this moment, Kimberly was forced to sit next to the man who she knew was responsible for her mother's death. James's false speech angered her even more. He had the audacity to say that he was proud of his wife's achievements. Supposedly, he always found it endearing when he was called Mr. April. At the end of his touching speech, the man teared up and complained that he didn't know how to live on without his beloved wife. He continued to mourn his wife's passing when April's relatives and close friends were around. But as soon as they left the house, there was no trace of mourning left. For many years after the tragic death of April Kauffman, the local radio DJ and veterans advocate, nothing happened, and the case was closed. Authorities couldn't accurately determine the circle of suspects, and consequently, no arrests were made. Kim never allowed her mom to be forgotten, holding vigils in her honor and never losing hope of achieving justice for April. Colleagues from the radio station, for their part, put pressure on the authorities to focus on this case. Local newspapers wrote article after article. Fortunately, Kimberly had inherited some of her mom's traits, particularly persistence, which eventually paid off. Meanwhile, Dr. James continued to live his life. It was as if April had never existed for him, and her death hadn't affected him in the slightest. A year after his wife's death, he sold her possessions at auction and remarried. Moreover, James wanted to collect on April's $600,000 life insurance policy. But as soon as Kimberly learned about this, she had the idea to file a civil lawsuit against him to prevent him from receiving the insurance money. The girl knew James was involved in her mom's death. She knew he was responsible. She just needed help to prove the doctor's involvement in the crime. So Kim turned to a law firm, and they advised her to sue him for wrongful death of her mother. This legal process gave authorities an opportunity to talk to James under oath. By that time, 2 years had passed since April's murder. When James was asked who he thought might have wanted his wife dead, he offered them several options. First, he voiced suspicion about some veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Then he mentioned a slumlord whom April had criticized on air. Finally, he talked about suspicions regarding the pagan motorcycle gang, with whom his wife sometimes crossed paths. Dr. James's comment about the motorcycle gang is what ultimately led to his downfall. Kim's civil attorney's strategy was to gather all possible evidence and hand it over to investigators. If they had irrefutable facts on hand, the police would have no choice but to open a criminal case against James Kauffman. For example, one of the things handed over to the police was records of James's phone calls. A few days before the attack on Mrs. April, the doctor made a series of phone calls to a disposable phone, and these calls mysteriously stopped the day before the murder. Everyone knows that disposable phones are most often used to conceal one's true identity. Kim's attorney's strategy paid off. In 2017, a new district attorney became interested in April's case, and in a few months did what others couldn't do for 5 years. He assigned the case to an investigator known for his toughness, and he indeed did a fantastic job. At this point, there was much talk about the pagans' involvement in April Kauffman's murder and Dr. James's desire to get rid of his influential wife. The only major drawback was that the police needed something more concrete to make an arrest. It turned out that the FBI had become interested in James's medical practice. In addition to illegal actions with prescription drugs, he was also suspected of insurance fraud. The primary task was to charge James with something, arrest him, and meanwhile gather more evidence and bring additional charges. On June 13, 2017, federal and local authorities showed up at James's office with a search warrant, and then things went quite differently than they expected. The police only planned to seize some documents and leave, but James dug his own grave. When agents began executing the warrant, James grabbed a gun, ran out of the office, and shouted that he would take his own life if they tried to accuse him of something he didn't do. If he had spent literally 2 seconds listening to the agents, he would have understood that they hadn't come about April's murder. But now that his frantic behavior had given him away completely, James was immediately arrested and taken to a local hospital for psychiatric evaluation. From that very day, the doctor remained in custody because during the search, agents found much more than just incriminating papers. In his house, they discovered unregistered weapons, illegal documents, and over $100,000 in cash. His arrest gave investigators more time to gather evidence. Detectives already knew that James Kauffman was connected to the Pagans. He himself mentioned this in his testimony. They also knew that he was writing prescriptions for controlled substances for them, and the notorious motorcycle club was likely working closely with the doctor. Investigators believed that thanks to the relationships the doctor had established with the gang over the years, he could find an executor among them. If he didn't shoot his wife himself, it was quite likely that he turned to the Pagans for help. Now it remained to find someone from the Pagans to find out this information. However, this was not an easy task, given the Pagans' main rule, never to give each other up. Fortunately for the officers, there was one gang member who cared more about not going to jail than following club rules, and this person was Andrew Glick, the Pagans' president in New Jersey. Let's go back to the day of the attack on April. On the morning of May 10, 2012, Andrew Glick awoke and saw the news. He was aware that Frank Mulholland had finally taken on Dr. James's assignment, so he wasn't surprised. However, he was concerned that the investigation might lead to Freddie Augello, a member of their club who had initially received money for eliminating the doctor's wife. From there, it was a short step to unraveling their entire illegal operation involving opioids. Yet nothing happened. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. Throughout this time, no one was arrested. At first, this shocked Andrew, but as time passed, he relaxed and stopped worrying. His anxieties subsided because the person directly responsible for April's death had himself died from an overdose of pills prescribed by none other than Dr. James. James himself told Freddie Augello that he had taken care of the perpetrator, so there was nothing to worry about now. Everyone else who knew about the crime continued living their lives. Freddie spent the money he received from James on a bunch of equipment for his band. Andrew was involved in opioid smuggling and worked as a cook. For a while, it seemed they had gotten away with it. However, everything changed when James was arrested and his connection to the Pagans was revealed. Andrew Glick suddenly found himself at the center of the investigation. On November 1, 2017, FBI agents and prosecutors searched Andrew Glick's home, discovering several kilograms of illegal substances and stacks of cash. He was arrested. Facing charges of trafficking controlled substances, he was looking at up to 40 years in prison. Andrew realized he needed to save himself and agreed to make a deal with the police. On November 16th, Andrew Glick gave a full recorded statement not only about the details of April's demise, but also about everything related to the sale of prescription pills. He confirmed that James illegally prescribed medications to pagan members, and that through this operation, his mentor, Freddie Augello, received a share of all transactions. Andrew also said that it was Freddie who arranged the elimination of Dr. James's wife. But this wasn't enough to bring all the guilty parties to justice. The police needed something more than just witness testimony. They needed a recording of his conversation about the day the radio host died. Very reluctantly, Andrew agreed to wear a wire and talk to Freddie Augello. He was released on bail and given the equipment. In November 2017, Andrew wore a wire to 14 meetings with Freddie to gather irrefutable evidence. It proved challenging to get him to discuss the contracted crime. Freddie even grew suspicious, but, relying on the Pagans' cardinal rule that members don't rat on each other, began to talk. By this point, James was already behind bars, and Freddie knew Andrew had been arrested and released on bail for possession and distribution of controlled substances, so he remained cautious. He wouldn't openly discuss April's elimination, only mentioning that he needed to finalize matters with James. Freddie was worried that Kauffman might strike a deal with prosecutors and expose him to receive a lighter sentence. Freddie Augello's scheme involved eliminating James before he could start talking. He planned to accomplish this through his incarcerated associates. Naturally, his plan failed, but it gave the police an opportunity to apprehend him. On January 9, 2018, 62-year-old Freddie Augello was taken into custody and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and racketeering. That same day, 69-year-old James Kauffman was finally also charged with conspiracy to end his own wife's life and several other offenses. On the morning of May 10, 2012, according to prosecutors, Francis Mulholland was handed a gun and dropped off at the Kauffman's residence at the end of Woodstock Drive, where James had intentionally left the door unlocked. 18 months later, 46-year-old Francis was found dead from an overdose on his living room floor by police. It appeared to be an accident, but James Kauffman later confessed to his gang friends that he personally took care of the perpetrator to cover his tracks. The doctor prescribed him pills that caused the overdose. The investigation revealed that the long-standing alliance between the pagan motorcycle gang members and James Kauffman was formed for mutual financial gain by exploiting the doctor's medical practice for illegal distribution of controlled substances. These relationships ultimately culminated on May 10, 2012, when James convinced Freddie to eliminate his wife. Following these arrests, Kimberly, feeling immense relief, spoke at a press conference. She stated that from the beginning, she knew James was somehow involved in her mother April's tragic passing. For 5.5 years, the young woman felt like she was living while holding her breath, and now the day had come when she could breathe freely. The arrest of James and Freddie led to the arrests of 6 more individuals accused of distributing illegal substances and racketeering. James was transferred to another prison due to fears that Freddie might find an opportunity to end his life. When Dr. James appeared in court on January 18th, he looked as if he had aged 50 years in these months, hunched over and barely able to speak. In his testimony, James claimed innocence and alleged that it was April who introduced him to the pagans. Essentially, he accused his deceased wife of having connections to the pagan gang. While awaiting trial on January 26, 2018, Dr. James Kauffman took his own life. He was found unresponsive in his prison cell. He left behind a 6-page note insisting he had nothing to do with his wife's death. He was facing many years of imprisonment on several different charges. This man once again displayed cowardice, unwilling to face the consequences of his actions. He knew he would be forced to spend the rest of his life behind bars and found a way to spare himself from this using a bedsheet. The trial of Freddie Augello commenced on September 17, 2018. Several members of the Pagan Motorcycle Club testified as witnesses. Many suddenly forgot the gang's cardinal rule, never to inform on a brother, and desperately tried to save themselves. Ultimately, Freddie was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment plus 25 years. Freddie will be eligible for parole after 55 years, which in reality will never happen, as he would be 117 years old by then. It's unlikely this individual will become a centenarian. As for Andrew Glick, he didn't receive any prison time. All charges against him were dropped in exchange for his cooperation. Despite avoiding jail for his actions, he didn't feel good about being an informant. He was most upset about breaking the pagans' main rule. This man, in saving himself from prison, betrayed those who were close to him. Now all the pagans despise him for this and label him a rat. But Andrew was even more troubled by something else. One thing he's trying to come to terms with and will have to live with is the fact that he didn't stop April Kauffman's demise, although he had the opportunity. Justice for April was achieved, but largely thanks to her daughter Kimberly. It's no wonder the woman considered her child a gift from heaven. The daughter grew up to be a fighter just like her mother. Although she attained justice, nothing will bring back her closest person. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. Among today's internet users, It's unlikely to find someone who has never attempted to take a selfie. Millions of such images flood social media feeds. Most often, these photos depict a cheerful individual against a picturesque backdrop, surrounded by a group of friends, or proudly alone, showcasing to followers what they're currently doing. Amanda Taylor, a young 24-year-old woman, captured a selfie after committing a terrible crime. Amanda aimed to demonstrate to the whole world that she felt no remorse, and to this day, regrets nothing. April 2015, Blue Ridge Parkway, a lengthy scenic route in the United States, stretching over 450 miles through the southern Appalachians of Virginia and North Carolina. Along this road, a white Jeep speeds by. Suddenly, it vanishes from sight, turning onto another, even more remote road where there's practically nothing, no houses, businesses, oncoming vehicles, or any signs. The Jeep pulls over, and from the driver's side emerges an attractive young woman, clutching a pistol in her hand. She circles the vehicle and opens the passenger door, where her friend and accomplice, 33-year-old Sean Ball, is situated. His condition is less than ideal. The man drifts in and out of consciousness. The woman raises her weapon, points it at Sean's face, and candidly explains how she used him. As she reveals the harsh truth about their actual relationship, how their entire friendship boiled down to him merely fulfilling her desires, she feels liberated, thus effortlessly pulling the trigger. After dragging the lifeless passenger to the roadside, the woman gets back in the car, turns around, and drives off in an unknown direction. Soon, Sean will be discovered, and it won't take long for the police to realize that the man on the roadside is a wanted criminal who had been evading justice because he carried out a violent act alongside his girlfriend, 24-year-old Amanda Taylor. Before he was found shot dead, there was already a serious manhunt for him, but now law enforcement officers saw that Amanda was capable of shooting even her own accomplice, so it was uncertain what else this woman might do while on the run. Amanda Taylor was born on March 27, 1991, in Christiansburg, Virginia, into a fairly well-off family. Her childhood could have been described as wonderful, if not for a period of teenage rebellion. It was then that her family endured a considerable amount of trouble. Amanda and her best friend Mariah repeatedly caught the attention of law enforcement. The girls met when they were both 12 years old. They quickly became friends, spending lots of time together and having fun. For instance, in 2005, the pals ran away from home, got into trouble, and it's unclear how things might have ended if they hadn't been caught and returned home. In 2006, Amanda staged a dramatic scene at Christiansburg Middle School, where she was studying at the time. She shouted across the classroom about how much she hated the place and that someday she'd grab a weapon and finish off everyone in sight. Teachers couldn't calm the agitated teenager on their own and called the police. Amanda was taken to the station for disorderly conduct, but this was exactly what she wanted, as she was tired of studying. Amanda constantly found herself in trouble. In that same year of 2006, she stole her mother's car and, along with her friend Mariah, ran away from home again. The high schoolers were once more caught and charged with underage possession of alcohol. Shortly after, they were detained again for assaulting a young man. It turned out the guy was Mariah's boyfriend, and they had some disagreement. No charges were filed against the girls, so they were given a lecture about inappropriate behavior and released. In 2011, Amanda and a couple of her acquaintances faced charges for manufacturing illegal substances. This is ironic, as in the future, controlled substances would become the reason Amanda would commit a crime. This was how the once exemplary girl, Amanda Taylor, spent her youth. Her friendship with Mariah continued, and together they caused many problems for their families. But at the time, they cared little about their parents' peace of mind, as teenagers often don't consider the consequences of their actions. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, Please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. When Amanda was 15 and 16, she met a guy named Rex Taylor, who later became her husband. He was 2 years older. From their very first encounter, these two were practically inseparable. Friends said they shared an invisible bond. They couldn't tear themselves away from each other, and many indeed thought they made a great couple. Amanda and Rex, as the girl herself said, had a common outlook, different from others' interests. They saw beauty in what others considered dark and evil. The young couple adored monsters and serial killers, often imagining themselves in the role of one, and it was against this backdrop of interest in criminals that they connected, later realizing they couldn't live without each other. Rex repeatedly wrote letters to famous killers in prison, and if any of them ever replied, the boy would publish the response letter on social media, boasting about the unusual acquaintance. He and Amanda amassed a whole collection of crime-related items and always enjoyed showing it to friends. Rex was also intrigued by how a serial killer's mind works, so he loved watching true crime stories. He even developed something like a friendship with a death row inmate named Paul. Rex and Paul frequently called and wrote to each other. Rex changed his social media nickname for his new friend, shared life stories with him, and in early 2014 gave an interview discussing their strange friendship. While still in high school, Amanda became pregnant. It's challenging to become a parent at such a young age. Not everyone has the strength to care for a baby and continue attending classes. Eventually, Amanda dropped out of school to look after her little son. Following her son, she gave birth to a daughter, so finishing school was out of the question. This doesn't mean she became a caring mom and settled at home with the kids. Rather, the arrival of her son and daughter was an excuse to leave school, as Amanda didn't actually have a burning desire to become a mother. The arrival of her son and daughter was merely confirmation for the young woman of the seriousness of her relationship with Rex. These two loved each other and couldn't imagine being apart. At the same time, arguments constantly flared up between them. They split up, got back together, suspected each other of infidelity, and experienced various difficulties. But one problem in this relationship was more prominent and complex than all the rest. This problem involved opioid medications. The Taylors could have become a wonderful, truly happy family if their relationship hadn't suffered due to Rex's addiction. The young man became addicted to pills at a very young age. According to Amanda, he first tried opioids at 12 years old, and they were given to him by his father, Charles Taylor. After that, the teenager quickly developed a dependency, which now became a stumbling block in his married life with Amanda. Their relationship resembled a roller coaster. One moment they were an almost ideal family. The next there were shouts, tears, and accusations. Although Rex was addicted to synthetic drugs, overall he was an excellent, caring guy. Rex loved Amanda and loved his children, but the harmful habit intensified over time, and the consequences could become irreversible. The situation reached its peak when Rex crashed the car. Under the influence of some drug, he got behind the wheel of the vehicle where their little ones were sitting in child seats. This became the last straw for Amanda. It was April 2014, and the young woman decided she'd had enough. She told her husband that she loved him and wouldn't want to be apart for a second, but now he had to leave. Amanda was ready to take him back at any moment, as soon as he decided to quit the pills. Rex had no choice but to return to his father, Charles Taylor. The day before, Amanda had talked to her father-in-law and asked him to help cure Rex. She urged him under no circumstances to give the young man prescription medications. The woman wanted them to be able to become a normal family again. In reality, it turned out that Charles's home was the worst place Rex could have gone. Father and son together popped pills and had fun like friends. The elder Taylor lived with his elderly, paralyzed father, who was prescribed medication. Rex helped Charles around the house and in return received his dose. The young man used more and more each time, his addiction intensifying. If he missed even one dose of pills, his entire body would start aching and he'd feel nauseous. As Amanda later admitted, Charles Taylor, her father-in-law, wasn't a bad person. He was kind to her and treated her children, his grandchildren, well. But he didn't care at all about what was happening to his son Rex. Instead of trying to help the young man recover and overcome his addiction, he supplied him with drugs. Although acquaintances considered the 59-year-old man to be kind and generous, he enjoyed a good reputation in the community. Amanda asked Rex to leave in early April 2014, and by the end of the month, Rex was dead. Their little son was supposed to celebrate his 7th birthday that day. The boy waited in vain for his dad to come. Charles Taylor found his son Rex hanging in the shed. The young man had taken his own life. The saddest part was that Amanda's friends, Mariah and Johnny, were the first to learn that Rex was gone. They lived next door to his grandmother. And that morning, the elderly woman meeting them on the street near the house shared the tragic news. Mariah immediately called Amanda to confirm that the grandmother had told the truth and to express condolences. But it turned out her friend didn't even know yet that she had become a widow that day. Amanda promptly dialed Charles's number and heard the bitter truth about her husband. The inconsolable woman lost her composure and fell into hysterics, unable to stop. From that day on, Amanda Taylor would never be the same. Her world changed in an instant, as if she herself had died the moment she learned that her beloved Rex was no longer in this world. Amanda would have followed her husband without a second thought. But she still had unfinished business in this world. Her best friend, Mariah, was with her that day to make sure Amanda didn't do anything foolish. She and Rex had been together every day for 8 years and only separated for a month due to his addiction. They had split up over trivial matters but knew their hearts were bound forever. They had 2 beautiful children and even shared the same birthday. It's impossible to imagine the emotional trauma and guilt that accompanied Amanda. All her pain and anger from losing her beloved turned against his father. Amanda blamed Charles for Rex's death due to the pills, and Charles, in turn, accused his daughter-in-law of leaving the young man during the most difficult period of his life, when his son needed her most. Charles showed up at Rex's funeral with a gun, looking for her, so Amanda couldn't even properly say goodbye to her husband. Rex had been battling depression and drug addiction. This struggle had lasted for a long time. If Charles hadn't supplied his son with pills, everything could have gone a completely different way. Any addiction is a disease, and the choice to treat it or not always remains with the patient. Rex chose controlled substances, knowing he would lose Amanda and the children in this case. He couldn't bear it and took his own life. The widow couldn't calm down for a long time. She didn't just grieve, she nurtured and cherished her anger. According to Amanda, it was Rex who taught her to take others' lives. This desire arose in her after his death, and she simply couldn't overcome it. Rex's interest in criminals and serial killers was passed on to Amanda. So everything this young woman did later was just a reason to make her late husband proud of her. Amanda insisted that Rex was her motivation in the scariest moments. Incidentally, the death row inmate Paul, whom Rex had befriended, reached out to Amanda after Rex's death and sent her $1,000. So the woman also considered Paul a wonderful guy and family friend, despite the severity of the crime he had committed. The shared interests of Amanda and Rex regarding various maniacs and killers affected the woman more significantly. Her favorite video was one where teenagers brought weapons to school and started shooting. Most internet users get chills from these images, but Amanda found them entertaining. One thing was clear. The darkest thoughts had taken root in Amanda's mind, and she was heading towards something bad. But nothing was done to stop her. Once, she and Rex had been obsessed with a movie about maniacs, and imagined how they would continue the series of crimes started in the film. But fate didn't give them such a chance, and Amanda decided that since Rex was no longer around, she would need a new partner. The woman's choice fell on Sean Ball. Sean rented a room from Mariah and her husband Johnny. In fact, he lived in the basement of their house. The man had long been in love with Amanda and was ready to do anything for this woman, but she wasn't interested in him at all. Amanda simply used him. When she gave him a drop of her attention, she then demanded much more from him in return. Amanda liked that she could control Sean and keep him around for convenience. On March 27, 2015, Mariah, Johnny, and Sean were hanging out with Amanda because she had a celebration. The young woman was marking her 24th birthday. This day was really tough for her, as it was the first birthday in 8 years that she spent without Rex. She and her husband had shared the same birthday, so her friends tried their best to distract her, make her relax, and even have a little fun. Everything seemed to be going well until Amanda decided she wanted to visit Rex. Mariah and Johnny immediately realized this was a bad idea. They knew the young woman was in a poor emotional state and that visiting her husband's grave would only worsen the situation. On top of that, there was a knife in her purse. If you combine depression, unstable mental state, a knife, and her husband's grave, you could expect anything from Amanda. Her friends were simply afraid that the widow would go crazy, either lunge at them with the knife or harm herself. What they feared came to pass. Taylor collapsed on Rex's grave and began to have a hysterical fit. She pulled a knife from her bag, held it to her throat, and said she would go into the light after her husband right now. Fortunately, Sean and Johnny managed to grab her hands in time. The guys forcibly dragged Amanda to the car and drove her to her mother's house. It was around 2:30 in the morning. Her friends thought their friend had calmed down. But as soon as Amanda was outside, the drama unfolded with renewed vigor. The young woman broke free from the hands holding her and began waving the knife again. She shouted that it was her and Rex's day, and they should be together. If anyone interfered, she would not only leave herself, but also take her children. At that time, the Taylor's son was 7 years old, and their daughter was only 2. This doesn't mean she didn't love the little ones. She just thought at that moment that this way they would all be together with Rex again. Her loved ones had no choice but to call the cops. Amanda was caught and taken to the hospital. However, due to her behavior, she was taken to St. Albans Hospital, a center for psychiatric care and substance abuse treatment in Christiansburg. This wasn't Amanda's first such mental health crisis. At an earlier age, she had already been hospitalized twice because she had problems with anger. Now she also told the doctors that she needed help because she wanted to harm herself or others. But she might take someone's life if they let her out. She even named a specific person, Charles Taylor. Amanda's mother, along with her friend Mariah, contacted the clinic and attempted to persuade the doctors that Amanda needed treatment, or she might genuinely do something reckless. Her loved ones implored the physicians to do everything possible to keep her in the hospital. However, less than a week after being admitted to the psychiatric facility, Amanda was discharged. Instead of outpatient care, Amanda was prescribed a multitude of medications she was supposed to take and sent home. Naturally, she didn't take any of the pills. The young woman called Mariah and said she'd come to their place. As close as Mariah was as a friend, she understood that Amanda currently posed a threat. She phoned her friend's mother and stepfather, requesting they pick up the girl from the hospital. But the parents weren't planning to let her stay at home either. During their daughter's time in the clinic, they had spoken with social services and obtained custody papers for Amanda and Rex's children. The only option left was to ask Sean Ball, who was infatuated with Amanda, to look after her for a while. Considering what Amanda had been through, feeling abandoned by everyone and even having her children taken away, it's not surprising that an ill-conceived plan formed in her mind. Obsessed with Amanda, Sean eagerly rushed to meet her. He left in the middle of his workday just to be near this woman, but this collaboration brought nothing but harm and pain. When Mariah learned that Sean and Amanda were planning to go somewhere, She tried to warn her neighbor that it could lead to trouble, but the guy assured her that he and Amanda would just drive to his parents' house and come back. On April 2, 2015, Sean Ball and Amanda spent the night in a motel, and on April 3rd, they indeed headed to Sean's parents' house to collect some clothes and belongings. His mom later said that the young people were in excellent spirits. Amanda seemed like a nice enough girl to her, although they barely interacted. After the couple left the house, Sean's stepfather discovered that 2 pistols were missing from the gun safe. The man noticed the disappearance by chance, as the drawer wasn't fully closed. Apparently, Sean had taken the weapons and hadn't completely shut the cabinet door. Afterward, the young people set out to carry out the plan they had devised together. Since Mariah had taken away the knife Amanda had been waving around on her birthday, Sean bought her a new one, and this weapon was later used in the commission of a horrific crime. On April 4th, around 9:30 p.m., a woman named Ruth, who was Charles Taylor's neighbor, Amanda's father-in-law, entered his house to check on Rex's paralyzed grandfather. Moments later, she bolted outside and frantically dialed emergency services. Ruth informed the operator that upon turning on the living room light in her neighbor's home, she saw blood. The initial investigation into Charles's death progressed relatively slowly, as law enforcement had few leads to work with. They began checking Charles's acquaintances, but couldn't find anyone with a motive or intention to harm him. That same evening, a phone call came through at Amanda's mother's house. It was the call no mother ever wants to receive. Amanda was calling. She apologized to her mom for everything she had ever done, expressed her love, but said she had to do something terrible. Frightened by this call, the woman couldn't understand. They had seen her daughter that morning, gone to the supermarket with her and Sean to buy Easter baskets for Amanda's children, as Easter was the next day, and now she was calling and saying strange things. Mom begged her daughter to return home to Christiansburg and promised to take care of everything, but Amanda refused, explaining that she and Sean were planning to drive to Pittsburgh. This wasn't the only call Amanda made that evening. She also phoned her mother-in-law, Rex's mother, Melissa, and said she had done what she needed to do. Melissa started urging Amanda to think about the children and not do anything foolish, to which the young woman replied that she probably wouldn't ever be able to see her children again. In fact, Melissa already suspected what Amanda was talking about. She pleaded with the girl to surrender to avoid harming anyone else, only to hear a chuckle on the line and the phrase that if the police tried to detain her, Amanda would start a shootout. Shortly after these calls, surveillance cameras captured Amanda and Sean at a sporting goods store, where they were buying ammunition for the pistols. Then at a gas station, where the accomplices were refueling. After that, the couple checked into a motel room. They were already being hunted because everyone knew who had committed the brutal attack on Charles Taylor's house. In reality, Amanda Taylor herself gave the police a clue. While on the run, she actively posted photos and messages about her crime on social media. Her numerous posts allowed detectives to track Amanda's movements and led them straight to the criminal when she least expected it. On a spring April day in 2015, Amanda and Sean set out for Charles Taylor's dilapidated house in Ironto, Virginia, precisely at 3:27. This number signified Rex and Amanda's shared birthday, March 27th. Initially, they decided the murder weapon would be a knife. Rex's widow wanted her father-in-law to know it was her and experience not just physical pain, but emotional anguish as well. Sean Ball struck the 59-year-old man in the head with a crowbar. When he fell, Amanda took up the weapon and began methodically stabbing Charles, plunging the knife deep into him. In total, she inflicted 31 stab wounds. The crime scene displayed absolute brutality. Blood spatter was visible everywhere. On paintings, walls, the entire couch where Charlie lay was thoroughly soaked with blood. But Amanda didn't stop there. She did something even more outrageous, photographing herself next to the body and posting the image on her social media account. She wrote that she had a valid reason for killing her father-in-law because he had destroyed her husband with opioid addiction. Though she wasn't a perfect wife, this was the last good deed she could do for Rex. Amanda asked the police not to look for her, warning that otherwise someone else might die. She just wanted to peacefully follow Rex to find tranquility. Simultaneously, she requested a crime blogger to publish her selfie, where Amanda posed in front of Charles Taylor's lifeless body with the knife still dripping blood. The blog author was horrified by the image sent to his email and, refusing to publish it, forwarded the photo to the police. Amanda Taylor had just tasted blood and now wanted more. After disposing of Charles Taylor, she and Sean fled. They managed to slip away from the scene unnoticed and head towards Tennessee. The fugitives spent the night in a rundown hotel in Bristol, then continued on in the morning. Amanda and Sean quickly realized they were running out of supplies. They had no money, no food, and very little gas left. Amanda presented her accomplice with two options to choose from. Either send as many people as possible to the afterlife to obtain their money and valuables, or surrender to the police because without money, they wouldn't get far. She herself was mentally prepared to carry out a mass slaughter. At this time, the accomplices stopped to rest and stretch. Not far from the road, they spotted two teenage girls visiting relatives on vacation. Amanda pointed out the schoolgirls to Sean, hinting that this was the most suitable option to start with. She introduced herself to the girls and brought them to the Jeep, where Sean was supposed to attack them. However, the man refused to harm the teenagers, saying he couldn't disappoint his mother anymore. Apparently, the guy was deeply troubled by his actions towards Rex's father and still couldn't shake the thought that he had done something terrible. His unclear behavior angered Amanda so much that she got back into the Jeep and drove off at a furious speed. The young woman was pushed to the edge. She recalled Sean's words before they set out on their mission, and she realized it was all lies. Previously, Sean Ball had claimed he was a former Navy SEAL and had participated in combat operations. In reality, he was a very quiet, shy person. The guy was simply showing off to impress the girl. At that moment, sitting in the passenger seat, he had already written a farewell letter to his mother and swallowed pills intending to voluntarily end his life. Amanda had a bottle of anxiety and depression pills in her bag that she was given at the hospital. Sean took it out and swallowed everything that was left. Amanda, noticing that the guy was starting to lose consciousness, didn't immediately understand what was happening until she saw the empty pill bottle on the car floor. This angered her even more. She regretted getting involved with such a weakling. At that moment, the girl made up her mind. She had to get rid of this burden in the form of Sean herself. Amanda steered the Jeep onto the deserted Blue Ridge Parkway, which runs through the southern Appalachians, Virginia, and North Carolina. She wanted to find a place where no one could interfere. Stopping on the shoulder, Amanda took the gun and headed to the passenger side door. She said she had only used him for her own interests, for the car, money, and the weapons he had stolen from his stepfather. After telling Sean exactly what she thought of him, she easily pulled the trigger, aiming the weapon at her former accomplice's face. Then she dragged the body out of the car, leaving him to die on the roadside. Heartlessly, she photographed his face. She immediately turned the Jeep around and sped away from the scene. Amanda was secretly pleased about finishing off her accomplice. The only thing she didn't know at that moment was that Sean Ball hadn't died. He would survive and soon start giving testimony. Meanwhile, Amanda tried to build a reputation as a ruthless maniac, continuing to bombard the crime blogger's email with new photos. The blogger, in turn, forwarded all of this to the police. Then Amanda bought a disposable phone and began calling the blogger to find out how her case was progressing. During this time, surveillance video from gas stations along the way helped police track Amanda. She was spotted driving in North Carolina. It was the random blogger who talked the girl out of starting a shooting spree in the city when she called him again. Eventually, Using police spike strips, authorities were able to stop Amanda's car and take her into custody. Highway patrol pulled the suspect from the car and handcuffed her. She looked smug, as if proud of what she'd done. The young woman began to protest the officers' actions. She complained that they didn't even let her park and unbuckle her seatbelt. They just grabbed and dragged her out in the middle of the road. The criminal demanded respect for herself. In the interrogation room, Amanda also acted as if she didn't care about anything. She sipped a non-alcoholic drink and twirled a strand of hair around her finger. She waived her right to remain silent and confessed to killing Charles and Sean. When Amanda was informed that her accomplice Sean was alive, she deflated a bit. It turned out she wasn't as good a shot as she thought herself to be. The bullet had gone right through the guy's jaw, causing him to lose consciousness from pain, but without inflicting any serious long-term damage. Then, in a chilling revelation, Amanda told her story to the detectives and stated that she wanted to be put on death row for attempting to take others' lives. But when it came to formal charges, she didn't plead guilty to her father-in-law's death. In this case, she faced a trial, which was exactly what Amanda wanted. She desired to become popular and get the opportunity to tell the whole world about her crimes. The defendant recounted that for the first time since her husband's death, she felt extremely happy while stabbing the screaming Charles. She was glad to simply unleash all her pent-up hatred, anger, and negative emotions on him. Amanda compared the sensation of her father-in-law's violent demise to a joyful memory. Finally, Amanda stated that she had absolutely no remorse for what she did to Charles Taylor. She had done what she had been planning since the first moments after Rex's passing. Stabbing Charles in the heart was as thrilling for her as her first ride on a roller coaster. The jury needed only 30 minutes to find Amanda Taylor guilty of intentionally taking Charles Taylor's life. The woman was sentenced to life in prison. The judge called Amanda the embodiment of evil, which she very much enjoyed. Sean Ball recovered and made a plea deal in exchange for 60 years in prison, which will be suspended after 41 years from the deal's conclusion. He remains behind bars at a correctional center in Craigsville, Virginia. While Amanda is in prison, her best friend Mariah manages all her social media accounts. She also, along with her husband Johnny, helps take care of the Taylor's son and daughter. Rex's mother, Melissa, expressed that it was very difficult for her to hear Amanda and others accuse her son of being the reason the widow committed the crime. The woman said that her son, despite all his flaws, was a kind, attentive, and caring guy. Melissa was very close to Rex. The night before his death, she spent 4 hours with him. He complained about feeling a bit confused in his life, but was in a good mood overall. This made it even harder for the mother to come to terms with Rex's death. She even sought psychological help. Several years have passed since the crime, yet national crime shows still repeat the horrific details of this case. Amanda Taylor has long been serving her sentence in a correctional facility, but for Rex's mother, the horror of the crime hasn't ended. The constant attention and misinformation about her son, spread by the convict, haunts her every day. Rex's mother says that because of Amanda's words, many consider her son a bad person. But in reality, this isn't true. Melissa insists that Amanda's stories contain many lies and fabricated facts, which she invented solely to justify her own misdeeds. Other relatives of Rex said that Rex loved his father and would never have allowed his death to be so horrible, nor would he have let his wife take up arms. But not everyone who is fascinated by crime genres becomes a criminal. Apparently, for Amanda, this unusual interest turned into an obsession. Recently, Amanda Taylor appealed her conviction and lost. She says she plans to appeal her verdict to the Supreme Court if necessary. Evidently, life as an inmate isn't as joyful as the young criminal had imagined. When a loved one passes away by their own choice, there's a desire to find someone to blame. Many don't entertain the thought that it was the deceased's personal choice. Amanda Taylor decided to punish the potential offender with her own hands, for which she condemned herself to a life behind bars and deprived her children of a mother. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. Don't fear enemies. Fear those who are close, for it's the ones near you who betray, not foes. There's nothing dreadful about anticipating betrayal. The real horror lies in when treachery comes unexpected, and it turns into a knife in your back. Luton, Bedfordshire County, United Kingdom. On Monday evening, May 23, 2016, a 34-year-old woman was brutally slain in a house on Overstone Road. Sabah Khan was a mother of 4 young children. The crime was marked by extreme cruelty. The victim sustained 68 knife wounds. Some injuries were so severe that Sabah's arm and head were nearly severed from her body. When emergency services arrived at the scene, they were met by Sabah's younger sister Sabah, who had stumbled upon the corpse. From the outside, it appeared to be an ordinary, modest family home, unremarkable among others in the suburban area. But inside, officers encountered a scene of horrific carnage. Blood was everywhere, as if an entire gallon had been splattered across the walls, stairs, and floor. Today's story revolves around the Khan family, originally from Pakistan, specifically focusing on 2 sisters, Sabah and Sabah. Sabah, the elder sister, was born in 1982. Her younger sibling Sabah came into the world 7 years later, in 1989. The Khan family also included 2 sons. The girls grew up in the Netherlands, and when the oldest turned 18, the entire family decided to relocate to England. Sabah and her sister Sabah came from a conventional Islamic household. They took pride in their heritage, yet were also receptive to Western culture. Both young women spoke Dutch fluently, and upon moving to England, mastered the English language. The sisters shared a close bond. Sabah, being an exceptionally kind, gentle, and soft-hearted individual, took on the responsibility of caring for her younger sister. Sabah admired her and strived to emulate Sabah in every way. She often said they had one soul divided between 2 bodies. The Khan family was quite tight-knit, and they all got along well with each other. When the parents moved their children to England, they settled in Luton on Overstone Road, in an area known for its sizable Pakistani community. Luton is located in southern Bedfordshire County, roughly 30 miles from London. This city ranks second in the UK for its Muslim population, which comprises nearly 33%. It was here that Sabah began studying nursing. The young woman genuinely loved people and dreamed of benefiting not only her family, but also those in need of assistance. After completing her nursing courses, she found work as a caregiver. Sabah helped patients who required medical care at home. Her patients appreciated her for her dependability, friendliness, simplicity, and calm demeanor. The Khan family resided in a brick townhouse, a 2-story residential building with several multi-level apartments and isolated entrances. Each apartment in this townhouse had a separate street-level entry. Such homes are commonly found in most European cities. A couple of years later, when Sabah turned 21, her parents decided it was time for her to marry. They contacted their relatives in Pakistan to find a suitable groom for their eldest daughter. In the Muslim world, arranged marriages are quite common. The same happened with Sabah. The young woman, respecting ancestral customs, didn't object and happily agreed to marry, despite barely knowing her future husband. She simply trusted that her parents would ensure her happiness. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Incidentally, it's not uncommon for Pakistani immigrants settled in the UK to marry their compatriots. Arranged marriages have been practiced for several decades. Often, sham marriages are arranged between close relatives or individuals with significant age gaps. This is primarily done to emigrate from Pakistan and acquire British citizenship. Sometimes parents compel their daughters to wed men of their faith. Statistics show these unions frequently end poorly. Young women who've experienced Western cultural freedom often face moral and physical abuse from spouses who've lived their entire lives in a different country. Honor killings, where unfaithful partners are slain by their own relatives, are well known. Fortunately, Saima's situation was different. No one forced her into marriage. She willingly agreed, being very family-oriented. The young woman longed to marry soon and bring her own children into the world. Her future husband was named Hafiz Rehman. He was 3 years older than Saima and exactly 10 years older than her younger sister Sabah. Hafiz had lived his entire life in Pakistan, never traveling abroad. The Khan's relatives considered him a good match for Saima. Hafiz's family hoped the young man would have more opportunities and a better life in Britain. By marrying an English resident, Hafiz would obtain a British passport and become a full-fledged citizen of the United Kingdom. After the wedding in Pakistan, the couple returned to the UK. The newlyweds settled in the Khan's house, as it's customary in Islam to live as one large, close-knit family. Hafiz obtained citizenship and found work as a taxi driver. The man adhered to traditional Muslim beliefs and values. He wanted his wife to bear children, raise them, care for her husband, cook meals, and manage the household. However, Saima didn't plan to completely give up her job, so she juggled between her duties as a wife and caring for patients. After some time, Hafiz's young spouse became pregnant with their first child, a girl. Before the woman could recover from her first pregnancy, a second, third, and fourth followed. Eventually, Saima and Hafiz had 4 beautiful children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. 3 generations of the family lived in one house, caring for each other and providing all kinds of support. In total, 11 people lived in the townhouse. Saima with her husband Hafiz and 4 little ones, her parents, 2 brothers, and younger sister Sabah. Everything seemed to be going wonderfully, except for the usual domestic squabbles that occur in any family, not just such a large one. But at some point, the younger Sabah began to feel tension in her relationship with her sister. This started after Saima and Hafiz got married. Now the married woman had other priorities. Sabah felt that her sister was neglecting her, that she no longer had free time they could spend together, and that Saima was only focused on her husband and children. The girl grew tired of being in her older sister's shadow and decided to act. What exactly caused Sabah to have a secret is unknown. It's possible that initially, the girl simply wanted to get back at her older sister for growing distant. But once things spiraled, it became impossible to understand the true reason for Sabah's behavior. The girl was young, inexperienced, and at first didn't consider what her strange infatuation might lead to. So, within this large family, a secret emerged. A secret that was in plain sight, but only known to 2 people. It so happened that the younger sister Sabah fell in love with Hafiz, her older sister's husband, and interestingly, the man reciprocated. A passionate affair began between these 2. Despite the 10-year age gap, despite Sabah being Hafiz's wife's younger sister, despite them all living in one house with other family members, an all-consuming passion swept both off their feet. This affair began gradually with shy glances, playful flirting, and a new, thrilling feeling in their chests. The man, more experienced than Sabah, immediately understood what lay behind the young girl's brief looks. In reality, he took advantage of her inexperience and innocence. The affair began after the birth of the first child. Saima was so engrossed in caring for her daughter that she overlooked how her younger sister looked at her husband. At that time, they still had fairly good relations. Sabah even helped look after her niece, playing the role of a good aunt. And when no one was watching, she melted in the arms of another woman's husband. For all the following years, their double life continued. The affair periodically ceased, then resumed with even greater intensity. Over time, Sabah became increasingly obsessed with the married man. She and Hafiz communicated via WhatsApp messages because otherwise it would have been difficult to conceal the love affair from other family members living near them. With each wave of passion, this relationship became more strained. Sabah began to feel jealous of Hafiz's wife, her sister. She was overcome by fits of rage if she saw the man paying more attention to Saima. She complained to him that he found time to write to her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but couldn't find time to be alone with her. The secret affair was, to put it mildly, complex. The close family ties binding people living under one roof turned this house into a volcano, waiting to erupt at any moment. Despite the relationship developing right under everyone's noses, no one noticed anything. Or perhaps everyone just pretended, acting as if nothing was happening. Although, most likely, the relatives simply considered impossible what was occurring between Sabah and Hafiz. Their faith and upbringing didn't even allow them to entertain such a possibility. Saima herself paid no attention to the strange glances between her husband and younger sister. She was a devoted mom, looking after 4 children, while also being a hard-working part-time caregiver. She physically lacked the energy to monitor her husband, and she certainly didn't expect such betrayal from her younger sister, whom she had cared for throughout childhood. Meanwhile, Hafiz and Sabah would slip away from home and indulge in lovemaking in the taxi the man drove. When Saima went to work, they would meet in the family bedroom. At that time, the children were 7, 4, 2, and 1 years old. Sabah often stayed to look after them, so her presence in the marital bedroom wouldn't surprise anyone. Hafiz, working as a taxi driver, could also choose his shifts independently. He deliberately scheduled his days off when his wife was out. Although the secret affair in the family home continued for years, Hafiz always put his wife first. This greatly angered Sabah. At one point, the man even considered taking the younger sister as a second wife. He was already anticipating how happy he'd be with 2 beloved women. But a local imam explained that marrying sisters simultaneously was forbidden in Islam. So Hafiz decided to continue meeting Sabah secretly. For him, this girl was forbidden fruit, as she was young, innocent, and not allowed to engage in relationships with men before marriage. But Sabah belonged to him, making the affair even more thrilling. A few months into the relationship, Sabah became pregnant by Hafiz. This happened because he didn't use contraceptives, considering it unnatural. When the man learned of the pregnancy, he forced the girl to go to the hospital and terminate it to prevent their affair from being exposed and avoid a major scandal. Quite possibly, after this incident, Hafiz realized that a secret relationship with his wife's sister wasn't the best idea. So in February 2016, 4 years into the affair with his young relative, the man decided to end the vicious connection and start anew with his wife and 4 children. He began to consider moving to his own apartment. This would be the change he and Saima needed now. The affair ceased once again. The threat of Hafiz moving to his own place with his wife and children deprived Sabah of sleep. She couldn't imagine her life without this man, but there was no longer room for her in his heart. The thought of losing control over the situation led Sabah's mind to seek the only logical solution, even if it would be the darkest. The young woman dreamed that Hafiz would belong only to her, and she would stop at nothing to achieve this, even if her own sister, who until recently had been the closest person to her, stood in the way. Sabah turned to the internet, searching for ways to eliminate her rival once and for all. Once Saima disappeared, Sabah could take her place. It would be the perfect family, the one her older sister had once created for herself. They could all live happily ever after if Saima hadn't taken Hafiz for herself. The girl believed this man was made specifically for her. The fact that another woman was his wife seemed like some absurd mistake that needed correcting. Sabah desperately scrolled through web pages, She looked for venomous snakes for sale and researched the intricacies of poisoning people, read about hiring hitmen, and even studied an online article titled 16 Steps to End Someone's Life and Not Get Caught. In March 2016, Sabah contacted a sorcerer from Pakistan who practiced black magic and could supposedly send someone to the afterlife through spells. She told him about the situation, speaking in third person, that one woman needed to get rid of another woman to obtain a man. Sabah even paid this sorcerer over $6,000 to cast a deadly curse on Saima. The girl liked the idea of disposing of her older sister without dirtying her own hands. When no changes occurred in Saima's well-being, the younger sister wrote to the sorcerer again, complaining that everything had only gotten worse. The man now wouldn't even look at that woman and had completely lost interest in her. She begged the warlock to quickly finish off Saima so Sabah could reclaim Hafiz. But after she transferred money for the ritual to end her sister's life, the sorcerer simply vanished, proving to be an ordinary internet scammer. Sabah couldn't bear the thought of losing Hafiz forever. She considered him her chosen one, for whom she had broken Islamic laws, undergone surgery, and done things that not every woman would dare to do. Worst of all, her parents had started talking about marrying off their younger daughter. In fact, these discussions had been going on for a long time, and there was even a suitable candidate for her husband. But everything had stalled at the point where the two families, of the groom and bride, couldn't agree on the terms of the marriage. Although Sabah was madly in love with her brother-in-law, it was extremely difficult for her to defy her parents. She couldn't cope with this and felt she was taking blow after blow. It was hard for the girl to see her sister, who many thought had an ideal life, an ideal marriage, ideal children. While Sabah was still unmarried, had no children and no relationships, her future path was so unclear that she began to feel jealous, resentful, and angry towards her sister, Saima, for some reason deciding to blame her for all her troubles. It was these emotions that Sabah experienced at that moment that completely overrode the voice of reason. Meanwhile, Saima and Hafiz had found a suitable apartment in another area of Luton, where they could live with their 4 children. A date for the move was already set, May 25th. To Sabah, it seemed that Saima was stealing the life she deserved. The only solution was to get rid of her older sister as soon as possible. Moreover, Hafiz's interest in Sabah had noticeably waned. In recent months, the man had been courting his own wife in every way, knowing deep down how much he had wronged her. Sabah sent him messages full of romantic anguish. She wrote that nothing and no one in this world could change her feelings for Hafiz, that if she could, she would rip out her wounded heart and show him that with each passing day, her love for him grew stronger, despite everything. And if Sabah suddenly ceased to please Hafiz, it didn't change anything, because she was ready to do anything to get him back. This is exactly what she tried to do. Sabah devised a plan according to which she would personally dispose of Saima, her own sister, to steal her perfect life. The girl understood that while she was looking for a hitman willing to carry out her terrible request, time was running out, the moving date was approaching, and after that, nothing could be changed. At that time, Sabah was 27 years old, and she was preparing to commit the most horrible crime, taking the life of her own sister, with whom they were once one soul, for the sake of a man. On May 21st, 2016, Sabah went to the supermarket and bought a knife. The girl knew that in 2 days, on May 23rd, her parents, brothers, and brother-in-law Hafiz Rehman would be attending a funeral at the local mosque until late evening, as an elderly relative of the Khan family had passed away the day before. Her older sister Saima wouldn't be able to attend the funeral because that evening, as a caregiver, she needed to visit an elderly woman's home, and Sabah was supposed to stay home to look after her 4 nieces and nephews. Everything was falling into place perfectly for the terrible plan to unfold. The family home, where the bloody act was to take place, was entirely at the perpetrator's disposal. All that remained was to put the children to bed so they wouldn't interfere at the most inopportune moment, and then persuade her sister to return home early. And that's it. The rival eliminated. The path to long-awaited happiness with Hafiz open. This is exactly what Sabah thought as she plotted her attack. Saima left for work at 10:15 p.m., while Sabah searched the internet for information on how long Muslim funerals usually last. Everything had to happen within this time frame. She had to strike to secure her happy life with Hafiz. The girl put her sister's children to bed and began implementing her devious plan. At 11 p.m., Sabah sent Saima a message asking her sister to return home. She said that the youngest daughter, who had recently celebrated her first birthday, wouldn't calm down, was crying, and constantly demanding her mother. At 11:03 p.m., Saima replied that she was already on her way. In reality, all the little ones were sleeping peacefully upstairs in their beds. A surveillance camera on a neighboring house caught the moment when the older sister drove into the driveway, got out of the car, and headed towards the front door. It was 11:07 p.m. The footage captured the light turning on inside the house. This was Saima pressing the switch in the downstairs hallway, and 45 seconds later, the light went out, and the house plunged into complete darkness. It was during these moments that a horrific crime was being committed in the Khan house, lasting 8 long minutes. As soon as Saima entered the ground floor hallway, Sabah attacked her with the knife bought the day before at the supermarket. Not expecting any foul play, the woman lost those precious seconds when something could have been changed. The sight of her frenzied younger sister deprived Saima of the ability to make the right decision. When the blows rained down on her one after another, she no longer had the strength to defend herself. It would later be revealed that Saima died in the first minutes of the attack. Nevertheless, she managed to scream and call for help, but her cry was lost in the noise of the blows tearing apart her body. In total, during this ferocious assault, Sabah inflicted 68 stab wounds on her older sister. She slashed her throat so deeply that she nearly decapitated her. Then she stripped off the victim's outer garments and continued swinging the knife with such force that the victim's arm was left dangling, almost detached from her body. Neighbors heard Saima's screams. The commotion downstairs woke up the eldest daughter. The girl approached the stairs and asked her aunt what was happening, what the noise below was about. Sabah sternly ordered her niece to return to bed, saying she was trying to catch a mouse. She still needed to stage the crime scene as a random burglary, so she couldn't be distracted by the child. Several of Saima's arteries and jugular vein were damaged, resulting in a significant amount of blood. Her face, head, and right arm were also severely injured. In the heat of the moment, the perpetrator didn't notice that she had slightly wounded herself as well. When it was all over, Sabah broke the window on the back door, tossed her bloodied clothes into a plastic bag, and hid it in her room along with the bloody knife, her older sister's mobile phone, and some jewelry. She then took a shower, called her parents, and only afterward contacted emergency services. On the phone, Sabah claimed that a robbery had occurred in which her sister was harmed. The rest of the family rushed home and found Saima lying in a pool of blood. When the ambulance arrived, it was too late. The 34-year-old woman was already dead. The crime scene was so horrific that at first, the police actually believed the attacker was a man. The officer's first step was to question the main witness to the crime, the deceased's sister, Sabah Khan. The young woman told detectives that that evening she had been putting the children to bed while the other family members were out on various errands. The parents, brothers, and sister's husband were at a funeral at the mosque, while Saima had gone to work. Everything was normal. The children fell asleep, though the youngest had fussed a bit, and Sabah had to message Saima to hurry home, but then the little one dozed off. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video, it's really important. Sabah spotted her sister's car pulling into the driveway, so she went to take a shower. But just as she turned on the water to rinse off, she heard a loud noise and Saima's screams downstairs. Sabah threw on a robe and rushed down the stairs toward the source of the cries. In the hallway, nearly at the entrance, she stumbled upon her sister's bloodied body, after which she phoned her family and called emergency services. She hadn't seen or heard anyone unfamiliar, only Saima's screams. When officers inquired about the cut on her hand, Sabah stated she likely cut herself on broken glass strewn near the back door. Detectives believed her claims and began investigating the incident, but they were perplexed by Sabah's behavior. Her demeanor during questioning seemed emotionless and almost rehearsed. Considering her own sister had been so brutally attacked while Sabah was showering upstairs, her lack of emotion aroused suspicion. Although everyone grieves differently, and blaming the young woman for her current state was clearly unwarranted. What surprised the authorities most was that such a vicious crime occurred in an ordinary, safe, and quiet neighborhood, at a time when several people were in the house, including 4 sleeping children and the Khan's younger daughter. Police checked the vicinity, incoming and outgoing vehicles for any leads. While the crime scene indeed looked like a botched robbery, the ferocious nature of the attack on Saima made it seem more like an act of vengeance. The entire family experienced incredible grief from losing a loved one. Hafiz Rahman, Saima's husband, was beside himself. He was distraught over the unfulfilled dream of moving to a new apartment with his wife and children, as both spouses had been eagerly anticipating this happy moment and counting down the days until the move. Relatives and police appealed to the public for any information that might help catch the criminal who had taken the life of a mother of 4 young children. The community of Luton and its surroundings was deeply shaken. Saima's husband, Hafiz Rahman, delivered a speech. He said their family's hearts were torn to pieces. At that moment, the man didn't yet know that the motive for Saima's murder was his secret affair, and that he bore some responsibility as well. The forensic laboratory informed detectives about the autopsy results. As mentioned before, Saima had sustained 68 stab wounds. Death occurred after the first few strikes, but the perpetrator continued plunging the knife into the woman's body again and again. The police were almost certain that the crime had personal motives and was committed out of passion. A burglar or stranger wouldn't waste time pointlessly attacking a woman so many times after she had already passed away. That's why the police decided to speak once more with the main witness, especially since Sabah was very close to her sister Saima. During questioning, the young woman presented her version of events and told the police about the deceased's secret. According to Sabah, her married sister had a clandestine lover, so she entertained the idea that he might have ambushed Saima and taken her life. However, instead of deflecting suspicion from herself, Sabah only intensified it. It seemed she deliberately tried to tarnish Saima's reputation at a time when no one could refute her words. The fact was, detectives had already spoken with other relatives, neighbors, and family friends, and most believed Saima would never cheat on her husband. In reality, she simply lacked the energy, time, or desire for it. Caring for 4 children, looking after her husband, and working part-time all left no room for an affair. Theories even arose that it could have been an honor killing. What if Saima was indeed hiding some disgracing secret? The method of execution was so brutal that investigators were actually looking for a male perpetrator, believing a woman wouldn't dare such an act. To test their hypotheses, detectives examined the whereabouts of all family members over the past few days and confiscated all home computers and gadgets. Soon, they discovered that Sabah Khan had recently purchased a knife at a supermarket, and the bought knife matched the weapon used in the attack. They also managed to recover the Google search history. Further examination of Sabah's mobile phone revealed a long list of romantic messages. This uncovered a 4-year affair between the young woman and her older sister's husband, Hafiz Rahman. The crime investigation revealed a motive steeped in jealousy and hidden anger, fueled by the illicit affair. Several social media messages exchanged between the lovers showed that Sabah called her sister profane names and accused Hafiz of marrying Saima only to obtain a passport, after which the man blocked his relative on social media, thus ending communication. On May 31, 2016, 8 days after the tragedy, a search was conducted in Sabah's room. Detectives found the missing jewelry, supposedly stolen during the robbery, Saima's mobile phone, a bloodied knife, and blood-stained clothes Sabah had worn during the attack. The youngest daughter of the Khan family was arrested on suspicion of the killing. Investigators realized she had fooled them with her tale of a failed robbery. At first, Sabah denied involvement in her older sister's death, but she had to admit to the secret affair with Hafiz. However, she claimed that after a terminated pregnancy, she had distanced herself from the couple. The young woman still insisted on the robbery that had taken her sister's life, but it was hard to argue with the irrefutable evidence found in her room. Finally, Sabah broke down, and after several further interrogations, confessed to attacking her sister. She claimed that Hafiz had manipulated her to fully possess her, that he had physically abused her for many years. She felt trapped, as the man was 10 years older and much more experienced. During the trial in October 2017, Sabah Khan eventually pleaded guilty to her sister's murder. The prosecution stated that Sabah was infatuated with Hafiz. The infatuation gradually turned into a toxic obsession. The young woman could no longer tolerate the fact that she had to share her man with someone else. She was angry at Saima, considering her life perfect. In his testimony, Hafiz Rahman accused Sabah of harassment and manipulation. The man admitted that he had indeed made a huge mistake by succumbing to the charms of the younger sister, but then couldn't leave her due to threats. Sabah promised to harm herself if Hafiz stopped seeing her. She constantly sent him messages, expressing her love in harsh terms. However, no matter how much Hafiz claimed he wanted to end the relationship with the young woman, he continued to make love to her, even in the days leading up to the crime. Sabah Khan's lawyer insisted that Hafiz was not blameless regarding his wife. It appeared that the young relative had almost forced him to have an affair behind his spouse's back for several years. In reality, Hafiz had taken advantage of the young woman's inexperience. The lawyer portrayed Sabah as a lonely person with mental health issues, stating she had previous instances of self-harm and would now live with what she'd done for the rest of her life. While the attorney spoke of remorse, Sabah herself showed no emotion, sitting on the defendant's bench with a vacant stare. Clearly, at that moment, she regretted not the ruined life of her own sister, but that she would have to answer for it to the full extent of the law. Sabah Khan was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 22 years behind bars. After this time, she can apply for parole. Sabah Khan remains incarcerated in Bedfordshire, UK. Her lawyer filed an appeal, believing the sentence was excessively harsh. However, the Appeals Commission rejected the petition, not finding the term initially set by the judge to be outside the legal framework. Hafiz Rahman later made a statement saying he never imagined something like this would happen. He insisted he was ashamed of committing adultery and that not a day goes by that he doesn't regret what he did. But he remembered his wife, saying she was a loving mother to 4 beautiful children, a devoted wife, beloved daughter, and the most caring of sisters. Her tragic death completely shattered the Khan family. The most terrible thing for parents is to learn that one of their daughters took the life of another. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon. How often do we encounter tales where victims return to the realm of the living after their own demise to seek vengeance on their wrongdoer? You might say this only happens in movies, and you'd be right. Yet, real life sometimes offers narratives far more intriguing than cinema. Such stories inspire filmmakers to go to great lengths to create movies based on actual events. Today, you'll hear precisely this type of account. After all, Judy essentially rose from the grave to punish her tormentor and aid other women. When Bonnie and Daniel entered the room, they felt as if they might faint at any moment. On the bed lay a bandaged figure, its skin almost entirely gone. One hand lacked fingers, and the ears were missing. At first glance, they thought the nurse had made a mistake. According to the doctors, Judy had only hours to live, as such severe injuries essentially guaranteed a fatal outcome. Today's account will showcase one of the most incredible displays of human resilience ever encountered. This woman's life was a series of ordeals, one of which ended quite tragically. However, while teetering between life and death, Judy Malinowski managed to alter the justice system in her state. Judy was born on August 26, 1983, in Columbus, Ohio. She spent her childhood there with her brother Patrick and sister Danielle. Before Judy's birth, her mother had experienced several unsuccessful pregnancies, so the baby's arrival was a long-awaited miracle for her parents. As the eldest child, Judy took on the responsibility of looking after her younger siblings. The girl adored Danielle and Patrick. The three weren't just siblings, they were the closest of friends. Judy also shared a special bond with her mother, who treated her eldest daughter like a confidant. During her school years, Judy excelled in everything, performed well academically, made numerous friends, and was one of the most popular girls in her class. Her vivacity and charisma didn't go unnoticed. The high schooler won several beauty pageants, including being crowned Miss New Albany. At prom, she was named Queen of the Ball. After graduating high school, Judy continued her education at Ohio State University. She dreamed of becoming a teacher. The young woman shared her life plans with her mother. She desired a simple life, quiet and peaceful, to find a job after university and settle down in a cute little house with a loving husband and children. The college student spent most of her free time not at youth parties, but volunteering at nursing homes. She wanted her career to follow a path of helping others, but soon she herself would need assistance. Her idyllic world was plunged into chaos. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. A major tragedy struck Judy's life when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. For the first month, it seemed her life was over, and she was destined to die young. The young woman faced a serious battle for her own health and the beautiful future she had dreamed of. This period was filled with regrets, tears, and complaints about fate, but ultimately, the difficult fight was won. Remarkably, Judy managed to defeat cancer. Overcoming this terrible illness profoundly impacted the student's character. She realized she had accomplished something most couldn't. Now she felt obligated to be happy and live the rest of her life as she had dreamed in childhood, in love and harmony. When Judy turned 21, she met a man named Ron. The young couple immediately fell for each other and soon married. They had two beautiful daughters, Kaylin and Madison. Judy thanked God for her happiness. The illness hadn't affected her ability to have children. Both girls were healthy, and the young woman's childhood dreams were slowly coming true. Unfortunately, it seemed someone above decided Judy hadn't experienced enough hardship yet. While pregnant with her second daughter, Madison, she discovered her husband Ron was having an affair. This news completely devastated her. By the time Madison was born, the relationship with her husband had completely fallen apart. The couple divorced, and around the same time, Judy experienced a relapse. The cancer returned with doubled intensity. At that point, only one solution seemed possible: a total hysterectomy, a gynecological surgery to remove the uterus. The young woman, having just turned 25, was crushed with grief. She couldn't understand why life was so unfair to her, She had already beaten the disease once and won. Why did she have to go through this again? To rid herself of cancer, Judy agreed to the operation, which was quite successful. It seemed she could celebrate victory a second time. However, the hysterectomy left her alone with such severe pain that only prescription painkillers provided relief. The country was experiencing an opioid crisis at the time. Strong medications were prescribed in excessive doses. This led many people to become dependent on prescription drugs. Judy, unfortunately, became one of them. After the surgery, the pain wouldn't subside, and if she stopped taking the pills, it became unbearable. Constant use of strong painkillers led to habituation, and the drugs stopped working. Either an increased dose or an even stronger medication was required. Judy had been on pills for so long that her medical insurance stopped covering the treatment costs. This meant she could no longer afford prescription medications, so she turned to illegal substances. She essentially became dependent on drugs that provided even slight pain relief. It got to the point where Judy's life completely fell apart. The pills cost a fortune, and relationships with family and friends became increasingly strained. Addiction to controlled substances also made it difficult for Judy to care for her daughters. Fortunately, her family intervened. Her older daughter, Kaylin, was taken in by grandmother Bonnie, while Madison was cared for by her Aunt Danielle, Judy's sister. Although relations with relatives were sometimes tense due to the young woman's harmful addiction, they never abandoned Judy, not wanting her to face these trials alone. The family did everything possible to help her during this difficult time. Eventually, Judy realized her harmful dependency was part of her impulsive choices, affecting not only her, but also her children. This realization brought Judy to her senses. A rehabilitation course followed to cleanse herself and steer her life in the right direction. It was tough, but Judy Malinowski had handled even more challenging tasks. She simply viewed it as another battle for her own future. Once again, the woman triumphed over circumstances. She showed such determination that after rehab, her life changed dramatically. Over time, Judy returned to her former happy and cheerful state. The addiction was now under complete control. She managed to pull herself together again, find an apartment, a job, and reunite with her daughters. She continued attending meetings for people struggling with harmful habits, but already felt strong enough to finally return to a normal existence. Now Judy had the quiet, peaceful, happy life she had always dreamed of. This lasted for several years before everything collapsed again, as Judy's trials were not over. It all started with a man named Michael Slager. At 31, Judy met a man who contacted her on social media. They had actually crossed paths earlier at an acquaintance's place when she was still married, but she hadn't paid him much attention. In 2014, Michael turned 40. He happened to see Judy's photo online and began trying to catch her attention, commenting on all her posts, liking photos, and sending private messages. A sort of online friendship developed between them. After some time, Michael confessed his feelings. The man claimed he had liked Judy from the first glance, but she was married then, so he didn't dare approach her. He tried to forget their encounter, but accidentally stumbled upon her photo on social media. He visited her page and learned her heart was free. Michael showered Judy with compliments, saying exactly what she wanted to hear. He was considerate, attentive, affectionate, promising to give her tranquility, peace, and love. Essentially, he used all his charm to win her heart. April 2015 arrived just a few months after they started communicating on social media, when Judy changed her status to indicate she was in a relationship with Michael Slager. Michael's charm had worked, and from this moment, everything went downhill, because Judy didn't know one thing. Her new chosen one had an extensive criminal history. When Michael met Judy, he had already been convicted of theft, violence, illegal weapon possession, assault, sexual coercion, threats, false police reporting, resisting arrest, hooliganism, and so on. The list of his convictions was lengthy. It immediately became clear that the law meant nothing to him. Michael was a professional criminal, but somehow he managed to hide this from his new girlfriend. Although Judy's mom, Bonnie, sensed something was off about this guy from their first meeting, the woman couldn't even explain to herself why she disliked him. However, Michael used manipulation, telling Judy's mom that she shouldn't judge him for his tattoos or certain character traits because even Jesus forgave people their sins. And the woman backed off, deciding that her daughter would figure out her own relationship. Very soon, Michael moved into Judy's apartment and immediately acted like he owned the place. This happened just weeks after Judy changed her relationship status on social media. His possessive traits regarding his girlfriend began to show in every detail. The man wanted to control every aspect of Judy's life, who no longer had a say. For instance, Judy wasn't allowed to leave her apartment without Michael's permission. She could only go outside with him. Michael installed a tracking device on his girlfriend's phone, followed by physical abuse and insults. There was another thing Michael did to completely suppress and destroy Judy's will. He learned that until recently, her life had been hell as she battled a harmful addiction. Although Judy had nearly overcome it by then, Michael decided he could use his girlfriend's weaknesses to his advantage. He wanted Judy to be weak, vulnerable, and entirely dependent on him. To bring his plan to life, Michael bought a batch of illegal substances, actively encouraging the woman to relapse. If Judy became addicted to drugs again, she'd be completely under his control. Michael could use this against her at any time. He didn't use anything himself, wasn't a dealer, just bought pills on the street, spending his own money. No matter how strong Judy's character was, they say addiction haunts a person their whole life, and it takes maximum effort not to relapse. Over the next few weeks, Michael continued to rock the boat through manipulation, insults, and guilt-tripping. One day, Judy relapsed. She got hooked on white powder again, and her life spiraled downward. Meanwhile, Michael turned the woman's family against her, calling her mother to complain that Judy was high again, that she was out of control and using more every day, that she was wasting their money and only cared about her next fix. Bonnie believed her daughter's boyfriend and pitied him, thinking he was just a hostage to the situation. Michael seemed almost saintly to her, agreeing to bear this heavy burden of responsibility for her troubled daughter. The woman even gave him some money to pay bills, buy food, and so on, but Michael spent it on buying the next dose for Judy. It seemed as if this person had appeared out of nowhere, and only to destroy Judy's already complicated life. One day, Michael called Bonnie and said her daughter had taken so much of the drug that she lost consciousness. The woman panicked and called emergency services, reporting an overdose. The arriving medics found Judy perfectly fine. Michael convinced them there had been an overdose, but his girlfriend had already come to. This was done to create a record in Judy's medical file about an emergency call due to a suspected overdose. Michael did everything to make others believe the problem he faced was Judy. He portrayed her as completely degraded for a fix. He used this to justify physical abuse and violence. Michael started beating Judy for the slightest transgression. Her body was covered in bruises, and once he nearly strangled her. Judy was so frightened that she turned to the authorities and reported domestic violence. She wanted to press charges against Michael, but thanks to his manipulations, law enforcement simply didn't believe Judy. Before them was a woman with a harmful addiction accusing a sober man who was caring for her. That's how it appeared to the police. They didn't take her seriously, thinking she had just made it all up, and that Michael was a good person trying to help Judy overcome her addiction. That's why Michael had been setting up situations from the beginning, so that later people would think Judy had gone crazy and couldn't be trusted. His devious plan was working. The abuse continued until Judy convinced her mom to help evict Michael from the apartment. But all of Bonnie's attempts also failed because Michael had no intention of leaving, and it was useless to expect help from the authorities. At that point, Judy had no choice but to flee herself. She stayed overnight at her mother's and friends' places, rented motel rooms, and tried to stay away from Michael. She was completely powerless against him. However, every time Judy ran away from the apartment, Michael called the police and reported her missing. The police would find the woman and bring her back. Once Judy took Michael's car to get further away from him, but he immediately reported it stolen, and the woman received a warning from the authorities. Each time she returned home, the man made it clear that the police were on his side, and Judy could do nothing about it. He warned that someday he'd get tired of tolerating her antics. If Judy decided to leave him, he'd simply take her life. No threats could intimidate Judy, as living with Michael was worse than death for her, so she wasn't about to give up the fight. Her final desperate plan was to enter a rehab facility, get clean, and put her life back on track. This was a safe haven where Michael wouldn't be able to reach her. She would stop depending on him, as the man was supplying her with drugs. Now she could break free from her harmful habit and start anew. Unfortunately, Judy wouldn't even make it to the rehabilitation center. Since Michael would carry out one of his most brutal threats, it would forever alter the life of the woman and her entire family. On August 2nd, 2015, 4 months into their relationship, Judy prepared to execute her plan to check into a clinic. At that time, her 2 daughters were living with their grandmother, so the girls were safe. Judy informed Michael of her decision because otherwise he simply wouldn't allow her to leave the apartment. Surprisingly, the man agreed and even offered to drive her to the hospital himself. So, Judy and Michael set off for the Parkside Rehab Center, located near Columbus, Ohio. However, on the way, the woman asked for some time to mentally prepare. She persuaded Michael to take her to her mother's so she could say goodbye to her daughters before parting. Michael turned the car around and they headed to a gas station to buy some drinks. Along the way, a heated argument broke out between them, which continued at the filling station. Judy was fed up. She wanted to be alone for at least a couple of minutes, so she got out of the car and walked across the parking lot. Michael started the truck and drove after her. All their movements were recorded by surveillance cameras. Catching up to Judy, the man demanded that she return to the vehicle. They started arguing again. When the situation finally escalated, Judy splashed her boyfriend in the face with the soda cup she was holding. And this incident provoked such a fit of rage in Michael that he returned to his car, pulled out a gas can, and then, unhurriedly, poured its contents on Judy. He doused her from head to toe, saying it was payback for her stunt. The woman felt the gasoline getting into her eyes, ears, nose, and throat. Judy began to choke. She couldn't see anything and was completely disoriented. Stumbling, the girl fell onto the asphalt and begged Michael to stop, but a cold, dead look was frozen in his eyes. He didn't care what Judy was saying at that moment or how she felt. The only thing he wanted to do was cause her as much pain and suffering as possible. Then the man returned to the car, took a lighter, and brought it to Judy's face. Judy was terrified, she cried, pleading with Michael over and over not to do it. She promised to fulfill all his demands and never contradict him again, but he silently flicked the lighter and touched the flame to her clothes. The flames engulfed her fuel-soaked clothes in an instant. The woman began rolling on the ground to extinguish the fire. She resembled a red fireball. Every part of her body was ablaze. Judy felt as if thousands of searing needles had simultaneously pierced her skin. Meanwhile, Michael stood watching as his woman burned alive. His eyes at that moment were black, cold, and soulless. He observed, satisfied with what he had done. The most insane part was that all of this occurred in broad daylight under surveillance cameras. Presumably, Michael thought he was above the law and could do whatever he pleased. There were people right there in the parking lot. They rushed to Judy to help put out the flames. One guy ran up and started yelling at Michael to do something instead of standing there like a statue. Eventually, yielding to pressure, Michael finally retrieved a fire extinguisher from the car and doused the flames on Judy. Several people called emergency services, reporting that they had witnessed a man setting his girlfriend on fire. Soon, paramedics and police arrived at the scene. Incredibly, Judy was still alive. She was urgently taken to the hospital, while police began investigating the circumstances. Michael called it an accident. He claimed Judy had spilled some gas on herself while refueling the car, then went to the back of the station to smoke. Supposedly, the entire fire started due to a stray spark from the cigarette. When the family received a call from Ohio State University Hospital saying Judy had been in an accident and was on life support, they weren't told over the phone what had actually happened. Mom Bonnie and sister Danielle, not understanding, rushed to the clinic and were utterly horrified by what they saw. Nothing could have prepared them for what they would see when they got to the hospital. The mother and daughter even doubted they had come to the right room. But it was Judy. If you liked the video, put a like and write your opinion, emotions, and so on in the comments after watching. Thank you. 95% of the woman's body was covered in 3rd and 4th degree burns. Her skin was charred, her hair had mostly burned off, as had her ears. Judy lost several fingers, her clothes had practically fused to her skin, and her face was completely unrecognizable. Doctors told the family that Judy's burns were the worst they had ever seen. By that time, Judy had been placed in a medically induced coma. Her chances of survival were virtually zero. The doctors didn't expect the woman to live longer than a few hours. Among physicians treating burn victims, there are mortality equations used to estimate the likelihood that a victim will die from their injuries. This calculation includes the percentage of burned body and the patient's age. According to the nurse caring for Judy, the probability of a fatal outcome in her case was 110%. Meanwhile, detectives were questioning Michael to try to extract the truth about what happened. At first, the man categorically refused to admit any guilt on his part, but investigators had already viewed the surveillance camera footage from the gas station and knew that Michael had doused Judy with gasoline. When they informed him of this, he changed his story, and it was still far from the truth. Michael said it was all an accident. He and Judy had a minor argument, and the woman splashed soda in his face. In response, he jokingly decided to douse her with gasoline. Since she ruined his clothes, he did the same to her. Then Judy wanted to smoke. He handed her a lighter, and her clothes caught fire. His words still raised doubts, and there was only one person capable of either confirming or refuting what was said. That person was Judy Malinowski herself. But at that moment, she was under the influence of sedatives and completely unresponsive, barely clinging to life. However, her answers would determine whether they could press charges against Michael. So after consulting with doctors, it was decided to bring the victim out of the coma so she could help clarify the situation. This was extremely risky, but time was of the essence. That's how much time the doctors predicted Judy had, given her condition. No one had any idea if this would work, if the woman would hear them, as her ears were severely damaged in the fire. Nevertheless, Judy was brought out of anesthesia. She indicated that she could hear the questions and was able to answer them. Detectives made suggestions, and Judy nodded yes or no. She was able to confirm that it was Michael who deliberately doused her with gasoline and then set her on fire. This interrogation on the brink of death showed how strong a person this woman was. Overcoming pain, she tried to tell the police the truth about what happened at the gas station. After this conversation, doctors continued treatment, though they knew Judy was destined to live at most a couple of hours. But hours turned into days, days into weeks, and Judy kept fighting. The specialists handling her rehabilitation were amazed she was still alive. Of course, the woman was still in terrible condition. She was wrapped from head to toe in dressings and bandages, which had to be changed twice a day, and it was excruciatingly painful. Her burned skin bled and festered. The bandages stuck, and to change them, Judy had to endure excruciating pain each time. She couldn't move, had difficulty breathing, so it was decided to put her back into an induced coma, which lasted a long 7 months. During this time, she underwent about 60 surgeries, many of which were unsuccessful. They amputated her arm because it was burned to the bone. They performed skin grafts, and once she nearly died right on the operating table. While Judy fought for her life every day, Michael was held in jail awaiting trial. He was charged with aggravated arson and assault, but Michael still denied that he did anything intentionally. In reality, he was likely sitting in his jail cell waiting, thinking Judy would never pull through and be able to testify against him. And although it sounds terrible, the detectives were essentially also waiting for Judy's death to charge Michael with her murder. While authorities worked on investigating the case, the woman lay in a coma for months, her life hanging by a thread. The lead detective on the case no longer expected to hear that Malinowski had regained consciousness and was ready to testify. He was incredibly surprised when he got a call from the hospital. This was the first case with a likely fatal outcome where the detective managed to meet and talk with the victim. Judy could only answer questions in a whisper. She knew that whether the person who maimed her would sit in prison or continue to ruin other women's lives depended on her. After seeing herself in the mirror 2 months later, Judy vowed she would find the strength and seek justice. Michael's defense team stated that if he went to trial and if Judy testified against him, in the long run, it would be much worse for Michael. The jury would immediately feel hatred and anger towards him, and if Judy died from her injuries in the future, he could be charged with her death. Michael himself and his defense team didn't want to let this happen, so he changed his not guilty plea to no contest. No trial was held, as he essentially didn't contest his guilt. He was sentenced for assault and aggravated arson, amounting to 11 years in prison. And although this was the maximum sentence for such a crime, Judy was heartbroken. All she sought was justice. The woman wanted her voice to be heard, and yet felt that Michael had once again silenced her. However, Judy didn't give up. She continued to fight while she was alive, even in such a vulnerable state. Now she was concerned not so much with justice for herself, but with a desire to protect other women from such monsters. Judy wanted to use her situation and what she had been through to help future victims who might find themselves in the same position as her. Judy Malinowski spent months lying in a hospital bed, and all this time she was promoting a campaign to change the criminal justice system. With the help of her family, this woman lobbied for the adoption of a new law that would provide for maximum punishment for intentionally maiming someone. And although Judy couldn't change the punishment for Michael, she conducted this campaign in defense of future victims, recording messages directly from the hospital. Experiencing excruciating pain inflicted by the man she fell in love with, she fought for justice for others. In January 2017, her health sharply deteriorated. Doctors and loved ones felt that Judy's strength was running out. She was tired of fighting. It was at that moment that the prosecution realized they needed to record Judy's testimony to subsequently bring a case of intentional deprivation of life. Until then, the prosecution team, like Judy, was also angered by Michael's paltry sentence. So they asked her to record testimony for a potential murder trial. This had never been done before. They had to try to make Judy's story help punish the person who ruined her life in the future. Prosecutors didn't quite understand how this would work. They had to go through all the complexities of the judicial system to ensure the legality of their actions in the future. At that time in the U.S., there were no cases where a victim of a fatal crime gave testimony in a case about their own murder. Judy's condition was worsening every day, but the amount of pain medication she was taking had to be significantly reduced to ensure clarity of mind during testimony. Nevertheless, she agreed to it. This was about Judy, who had already proven more than once that she was a fighter and capable of breaking the system. The prosecution offered Judy the chance to record her testimony on video before she passed away. These recordings were intended to be played in court during the trial regarding her death. Preparing for this challenging filming, the woman decided to combat her pain independently, completely ceasing the use of painkillers so that Michael's defense couldn't later accuse her of being incoherent. For several weeks, she trained herself to exist without pills. When Judy succeeded and her condition stabilized, she was finally ready to fully recount her tragic story. The worst part was that Michael requested to be in the same room as Judy during her testimony. He had the right to face his accuser, but fortunately, the judge deemed this an intimidation tactic, and Michael's request was denied. Instead, medical staff remained by Judy's side. Family members were also prohibited from being present in the room. Judy was connected to a video call, and right there on the hospital bed, she was sworn in. Both the prosecution and defense were to question her. It resembled standard testimony, except for the fact that Judy was lying on a hospital bed, fighting for her life and telling a story that would help her achieve justice only after her death. The fire-scarred woman gathered all her willpower and managed to recall the events of that tragic day. She remembered her thoughts at that moment. Judy was certain she was dying, so she simply prayed to Jesus to forgive her sins and look after her children. After that, she lost consciousness and only woke up in the hospital. Then Judy described what it's like to be burned alive. She wanted to make it clear that this wasn't an accident. It was done intentionally. When one of Michael's lawyers cross-examined her, he reminded Judy of her harmful addiction, how she allegedly stole her boyfriend's car, and about an accidental overdose when emergency services had to be called. The lawyer attempted to portray Judy's account as unreliable and inquired whether she had provoked Michael that day. He aimed to cast doubt on her ability to reason clearly, given the woman's poor condition. However, this was precisely why Judy endured severe pain, refusing medication throughout the cross-examination. She displayed incredible strength and courage, never wavering from her convictions. Finally, the video testimony concluded. Judy had accomplished what she had endured all this pain for, and could now rest peacefully. It took a lot of energy to go through this ordeal, which noticeably affected her well-being. No one knew how long she would survive after such strain. In June 2017, after almost 2 years of daily struggle, Judy decided to transfer to hospice care. On June 27, 2017, 696 days after the tragedy, Judy Malinowski passed away at 33 years old. Her mother Bonnie was by her side, supporting her unfortunate daughter until the end. Then, nearly a year later, in July 2018, Michael Slager finally stood trial for Judy's murder. The man planned to plead not guilty, but at the preliminary hearing after Judy's testimony was presented to the court, Michael's attorney advised him to accept a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. Ultimately, Michael agreed to the deal and pleaded guilty in exchange for life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. It turns out this was exactly what Judy Malinowski had requested before her death. She wanted Michael to receive life imprisonment because she felt the death penalty would be too lenient compared to what she endured in her final 2 years. Judy hoped that this person, sitting behind bars, would reflect on what he had done and realize the full weight of his guilt. After the case concluded, the family established the Judy Foundation, which provides support to victims of domestic violence and people struggling with addiction. Incredibly, the woman's efforts were not in vain. In summer 2017, Ohio passed a new law called Judy's Law, which incorporated all the changes Judy had requested. Judy's 2 daughters, then 10 and 13 years old, attended this event. The girls sat next to the state governor as he signed the bill. Addressing a room full of reporters, the younger daughter called her mom brave, while the older one added that at least mom didn't suffer in vain. Judy's law was passed by the state senate the day after her death. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.